And we're live.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the free Assange online vigil series number 16.0. My name is Taylor Hudak, and I am joined with my co-hosts Andrew Smith, Christy Duffy, and Steve Poikinen. Tonight, we will be talking, of course, about the case management hearing that took place this past Monday on October 21st. And before we get to all of that, an update on Assange's case and Chelsea Manning. Today is day 194 since the brutal arrest of Julian Assange outside of the Ecuadorian embassy, and it is day 3,241 of his unlawful and arbitrary detention. As for Chelsea Manning, today is day 223 since she has been imprisoned, and she is now up to $114,000 in fines. Like I said, we will be discussing in depth the hearing, and we will also provide our own perspectives on what we are seeing happen maybe in the future as a result of this hearing. But before we do get to all of that, we are joined by a very special guest this evening, Sean O'Brien. Sean is the founder of Yale Privacy Lab and a lecturer in cybersecurity at Yale, and the founder and CEO of PrivacySafe, a secure storage device. So Sean, hi, how are you
Great.
doing?
Happy to be here.
Great. So I want to begin by asking you to expand a little bit on what PrivacySafe is.
Sure. So PrivacySafe is basically a small computer. It's an IoT appliance, right? Internet of Things appliance. I know that's a buzzword, but basically it's a little mini device that is about the size of a credit card. And we're designing it to do secure storage that's local and encrypted in a way that you control the encryption. So basically all the encryption keys are in your possession. You can sync data from that device to another privacy safe device. And as the data goes over the pipe, it's encrypted, but also it's encrypted at rest, meaning if there's a data breach on the other end, you don't have to worry that your data is going to get out there and live on the internet forever. So that's the very baseline promise that we have. We're also building in some malware scanning and protection so that files on the device are scanned for ransomware and all that nasty stuff. We've got some software for crypto coins, so a Bitcoin payment processor called BTC Pay, and a Monero wallet. Monero is like a privacy coin that a lot of folks are really into and we're really excited about. And there's some other cool features too, but we can get into that.
So if you could too, could you talk about just kind of encryption and cybersecurity in general, and like the most, I would say like the most basic level possible, and then we can kind of build from that as we go.
Sure. So to keep something secret, right, you have to scramble it or obfuscate it so that if someone were to get that data, they can't read it. So very basic versions of this since the beginning of time would be just like moving one letter of the alphabet to another letter of the alphabet, right? But in the modern world, all of the technology that we use has some form of encryption, or really all the network technology, I should say. And that technology usually has a private key and a public key. The public key is the thing that you advertise so that people can scramble something and send you a message. And the private key is the thing that you keep and hold on to. Hopefully no one else has a copy of it. Hopefully there's no backdoors or any problems with it, right? With the encryption scheme. But assuming all of that works, right, then you're the only one who can read the thing that was intended for you. So that's the very basic concept. Of course, all of this technology, as far as WikiLeaks and Assange and all of that is concerned, it's the stuff that allows people to be autonomous on the internet, to be free in their daily lives, if we can harness it and make sure that it doesn't get corrupted.
And so we'll touch on this probably a little bit later too, but Snowden gave a really good example of how mass information is collected today in the Joe Rogan podcast. I don't know if you had a chance to see it, but he gave a really good just start to finish analysis of how a basic phone call works in the mass surveillance state and how it's collected from point to point and different things like that. So what are some ways you think that people could take just the basic steps to protect themselves, even if it's not going like with a full-blown dark device? Like what would something that, I don't know, just anyone could pick up on their phone to help protect them?
Sure. So I didn't see the interview in full. I just kind of caught little pieces of it. But the example of the phone system is a really apt one. Phones, by definition, have an identifier, right? So you've got your country code, you've got your area code, and then you have a number associated with the device. So when a signal is sent from one phone to another through a cell phone tower, through whatever the network is, it's switched in such a way, the signal sent around in such a way that you know who the recipient of the call is, and obviously, or sorry, the sender of the call is, and obviously who the recipient is. So who's trying to talk to who. So in very basic ways, right, every time we go out to a website, and this is something that isn't like totally apparent, especially if you've grown up with smartphones, right? When you go out to something on the web, you're sending out a request, right? And you're getting a response. And that very basic communication can be tracked. Even if you have, the content of that communication obfuscated with encryption, right? The metadata, who you're talking to, how long you're talking to them, what country they're in, et cetera, can be tracked. Now, smartphone devices are constantly doing this. So they're constantly pinging servers out there in the world. Apps are extremely leaky. So if I bootstrap a quick app and we call it the Sean app, and it does something like, tag you on a map so that you can get some, I don't know, location data about where the restaurants around you are, right? Not only do you have that location data from the sensors in your phone being sent through the internet, right? But you also may have the app pinging dozens, sometimes, I don't know about hundreds, but it's happened. But many, many, many other servers. So some of the work we've done at Yale Privacy Lab is look at leaky apps that are constantly pinging all these other locations on the internet and giving up information about you. And we call these things trackers. Trackers can vary it's a general term, but these trackers can range from just looking at basic communication that you're doing, surveilling you in a way where they're identifying your demographics and building user profiles on you. They can be listening to your conversations in some cases, and we're finding that more and more. Or they can be doing things like even facial recognition, et cetera, et cetera. So they vary between like sort of what we would consider advertising-based surveillance, trying to identify people, sell things to them, and so on, to all the way to the stuff that really I think creeps people out, as it should. Listening to conversations, transcribing them potentially, and scanning your face and things like that. All that said, being aware of what apps you're using and how many trackers are in those apps, or if they're tracker free, if you can get tracker free apps, is one step you can take. There's an excellent scanner online called Exodus Privacy. That's exodus-privacy.eu.org, where you can look up apps, basically. You can look up Waze or whatever, and it'll show you what tracker code is potentially in that app. Staying away from apps that have trackers is obviously a good thing. One way you can stay away from any trackers is by using something called F-Droid, f-droid.org. This will allow you on an Android phone, at least, to install apps that have no trackers in them. And we know they don't have trackers in them because they scan all of the apps through this thing called Exodus before they release the app out to the people downloading, right? So Yale Privacy Lab, we've worked with Exodus Privacy. We've made sure that any trackers we identify, Exodus knows about, and Exodus makes sure that any trackers they identify, which is many, many more than we've done, they let F-Droid know about. So that kind of chain of trust, where you're proactively looking at your apps and seeing how leaky they are and trying to make sure you stay away from ones that have tracker code in them, that's one thing you can do. But another thing, if you can do it, block ads. Make sure you block ads. I mean, that's step number one. Ads, by definition now on the internet, are constantly looking back at you. You're not just looking at them. So.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point to make, because I do catch myself, even if I'm having a conversation about something and I don't necessarily search something, but I just am talking about it in conversation, I'll have ads for it directly on my phone or something related to it. There's countless examples of this that I could think of, really, but I think that's definitely a scary thing when you see that, because you know that you did not search it. So
Yeah.
I think it's important that people are aware that this is not only tracking, but it's also listening in on conversations.
Yeah, so I used to say, and not that long ago, we only had a few examples of trackers doing this sort of thing. It's computationally expensive to listen to a conversation, transcribe it, and then pick out of that conversation the pieces that are valuable, right? Usually the thing that's most valuable to, advertisers as well as, spies, traditional state spies, is who you're talking to, all that stuff I was talking about that we usually call metadata, right? Your location, where you're traveling, and so on. So conversations, I wouldn't say they're off limits. Of course, they never were off limits, but there weren't a lot of examples of default trackers taking conversations, transcribing them, and analyzing them. What we found, though, of course, as voice assistants are becoming more popular, Alexa, the Cortana is the Microsoft one, which I don't know if anybody uses, but the Google stuff with Google Nest and so on, having microphones that they don't tell you about. They're just outsourcing a lot of this stuff to basically cheap labor, right? To sweatshop labor, and they'll have teams of people helping to transcribe this stuff, helping the software get better and better at transcribing. And that way it's less computationally expensive for them to spy on us in this way. So we do know now that there's lots and lots of examples of this happening. It is happening actively all the time. And like I said, I used to try to have a little bit of healthy skepticism about it, just because I try not to put my foot in my mouth without having real world examples. But we should assume at this point that it's pretty much ubiquitous. When we go buy a smart TV, it may have a microphone in it that's listening to us. When we go buy a smart thermostat, it may be listening to us. And of course, our phones may be opening up the microphone and listening to us. But the other thing that goes on with your microphone, which is much lesser known, and we've done some studies of, we've looked at about 6 or 7 of these types of trackers, and they are getting more and more popular, are ultrasonic trackers. So basically, if you're at a concert or in an arena, especially like outdoor environments, speakers may be playing ultrasonic tones that are, dog whistle type tones that we can't hear.
The Josie and the Pussycats thing. That movie was prophetic. I can only hope that what they're broadcasting into people's brains is you can overthrow the government. I'm pretty sure that that's not what they're saying, but this kind of ties into something that I wanted to talk to you about. That I'm not sure if I asked you this when you were on Slow News Day or not. And by the way, if you haven't seen the episode that I did with Sean back, I don't know, March or something like that,
6 months ago or so, yeah.
It is a really, really good episode. There is a lot of incredible information in it, and I highly recommend it. Not just because it's my show, but because he has a lot to say, and it's all worth listening to. But what I wanted to ask you about is the probability then of subsonic frequencies being used for torture, and more specifically in the case of Julian Assange with 7 years in an embassy.
Sure. So my understanding is that, first off, this stuff is always being tested, right? By powerful state actors. They're always testing new ways to torture people. And we know of some past examples where this kind of thing was tried to, basically make people either go insane or have some other health problems, right? My understanding is there's some tangential evidence that they've been doing things like this, but not only stuff like this, but like microwaves and so on, and pointing it at the embassy. I don't know directly, man, but I don't put anything, especially in the case of Assange, I don't put anything past, the US government, the UK government to do. So totally possible. I don't know, man. I really hope that kind of torture doesn't happen, but we know it's the real world, right? And we know it's the US state, and the US state has, as Julian says, infinite resources, right? And they're going to use them to break him. The fact
Well,
that
and we know that sonic torture has existed forever.
sure.
So altering the frequency to a different level, that technology has been around for at least a generation,
Yep.
if not two. Uh, so I don't. I mean,
Like I said,
I wouldn't be surprised if we went to WikiLeaks right now and typed in subsonic torture if something popped up.
yeah. So we know that high frequencies can be picked up by folks that have extremely sharp hearing as well. And is picked up by children and obviously picked up by animals. But you said subsonic too. We know that subsonic frequencies can be used to cause physical pain in people. Um, So yeah, I mean, I don't know specifically. I don't have actual, no proof of this, but it would not surprise me if that kind of stuff is being used. And why wouldn't it be? They've brought out everything else, right? But we just have to see. Clearly, though, I mean, we know in Guantanamo and places like this, they play loud music and make people insane with sleep deprivation and so on. So the other question is, does ultrasonic tones or tones that are subsonic or some combination of these technologies, can they be picked up by an individual for sleep deprivation? That'll make you nuts alone. So I don't know. Yeah, it's something I'll look into. I don't know enough about it. I was going to say, and I do think it's important to note, though, that these ultrasonic tones can be used to transmit data, which is another important role. When we see microphones being opened up on devices, it's so that they can both transmit, right? Because microphones can be turned into speakers in some case. Well, by definition, they can be turned into speakers. The question is if your software and your hardware lets it happen. But also they can collect data. So if your microphone is open and you get some ultrasonic information coming through the microphone that's basically zeros and ones, right, bits, then your phone or some other device can act on that. So often ultrasonic tones are used to control other devices from a distance in a consentless way, in a way where you obviously wouldn't allow your machine to be controlled. So the other question is, how much of that stuff is going on in regard to WikiLeaks or has gone on, or his lawyers and so on. I totally would not put that past them. It's the kind of thing they can get away with and nobody's going to be looking for it. It's very,
Well,
very hard to detect.
They didn't have the live feed until 2017.
Right.
So you have to assume that there was surveillance that they weren't getting before that, and that would prompt them to want to find a way. And along with that, clearly, as we've been reading and hearing about from people like Craig Murray and John Pilger and others, the deterioration that Julian Assange has experienced on uh, a cognitive level.
I know. It's awful.
Yeah.
When I hear that he can't remember his name and his age, it just kills me. It's somebody that sharp and that just on top of it all the time and able to just rattle off, all kinds of complex information very quickly, to be brought down to that level is pretty disgusting, to put it mildly. So. Yeah, and then the other thing to note too is that, like I said, cameras can do these things, right? We need to start thinking about like all these devices, and I'm sure you guys do, but just the audience in general, cameras, TVs, the types of things that we used to think of as just sort of, electronic appliances, they're computers. So they're manipulatable in ways that a lot of the old-fashioned tech, if you could manipulate it in this way, it would be, a small research project. But now, you can tell the computers in these machines, in smart devices, to do all kinds of things from a surveillance perspective that they didn't used to be able to do. So we're just being surrounded by that stuff all the time. And I do think, one of the conclusions that some academic papers have come to about the frontiers of surveillance, where state surveillance is going to go, certainly, and where we know corporate surveillance, advertising surveillance is going from big tech companies as well as like really small startups that are working on this stuff. They're doing it through these IoT devices that we're surrounded by all over the place. They're doing it with sensors. The more that folks like you or I start using technologies like Tor to be anonymous on the internet, or encrypted email or other encrypted forms of communication, the more that there's going to lean on these sensors to be tracking folks. You're not going to be able to get into a car without the car figuring out that you're in it. The pressure on the seat, some other presence, right? The types of things that you would think would be very science fiction-y. I know there's a company, in my backyard, basically, that's doing surveillance through high-speed light. So they've got smart LEDs, basically, that are just lighting, in offices, and it can blink really, really fast, and the ambient light sensor on your phone can react to it. So it's the kind of thing
Is there a way to disable stuff like that?
So technically speaking, right, your software can allow you to disable it unless you put a version of Android on an Android phone. And I keep leaning on Android because iOS is so hard to modify. And even if you can jailbreak iOS, like Apple just push an update that'll break it, pretty frequently afterwards. But if you do get an Android phone where you can put Lineage OS or one of these other ROMs on it, you can at a software level start controlling these sensors, right? But in a real way, when you get all the way down to it, and this is the kind of thing Snowden would say, you have to disable it at the hardware level, right? And good luck. So, being able to do it at a hardware level and prove that you can do it at a hardware level, so far there hasn't been a phone release that you can do that. So, when Snowden talks about it, he'd say, well, you'd have to just, disconnect the connections or solder the circuit in a different way, right? And just brick parts of the phone so that these sensors wouldn't come on. So,
wow.
Is there some devices that are better than others as far as not just giving away your information? Like would, I don't know, like LG or something like that be better than Samsung?
yeah. So in the world we're in, there's really only a handful of operating systems with different configurations, right? And the freer operating systems, the ones that are based on free and open source software, so basically anything based on Linux in one way or another, are generally speaking the better devices because you have more control over them. And I can go kind of into the history of software, but I'm not gonna for you guys today. But basically, if you can modify your software at a very low level, right, then you have the freedom to be able to turn off some of these things and turn on some things, right, some features that may have been disabled in your phone. Android devices started out as very freedom respecting, very free and open source software phones because they had basically not a stock version of Linux, but a similar, version of what some people call GNU/Linux, right? And then Google started putting in more and more stuff on top of that, more proprietary stuff that controls the software, more locked down code that they only know the secrets to, and so on. Now, when that version goes out, the thing they call the AOSP, so the Android Open Source Project, when that version goes out, right, to a Samsung or to Huawei or to any of these companies, usually they add even more stuff into it, right? So unless you can remove all that stuff and install your own operating system, and there are modified versions of AOSP, the Android Open Source Project, like Lineage OS, the one I just plugged, that don't have all that crap in it. They don't have all that cruft. You can control things from a privacy perspective very, very well. However, if your model phone has some proprietary need, right? Like maybe, the screen's not going to turn on, or the thing's not going to boot, or, some feature on the phone's not going to work, like your camera, without a proprietary chunk of code, a secret black box piece of code, then you still have a security worry there. So what I do is I actually get a phone that, ironically enough, is a Google Nexus phone. The Google Nexus phones are some of the freer phones from a hardware standpoint because they are the sort of base development phones that Google targets before a lot of crap is added in. And then I put a ROM on there, a different version of Android that has no Google stuff in it. Then I go out and I grab all of my apps from F-Droid, which was the free and open source app store, if you want to call it that, although everything's actually free in there from a money standpoint as well. And then I make sure I just don't use any of the Google crap. Now, even if you do that as an individual, and I realize people live in the real world and they need to do things like maybe get a cab, right? Get an Uber or something. There are ways to install apps one by one, or even just use the web browser for those kinds of services so that you're not installing a bunch of crap on your phone that can potentially spy on you. So that's the approach I recommend. It is not ideal. And in fact, laptops and desktop computers are much better from a surveillance perspective, from a freedom perspective, et cetera. You can totally lock down your laptop and find devices that don't have any proprietary crap at all in them. But even that's kind of a research project. So we're not moving in a good direction, to put it mildly. It's an ecosystem problem. You need a lot of knowledge to do this. When we do workshops, like the Privacy Lab workshops we try to just do small little goals, right? Use an ad blocker, start using a better search engine like DuckDuckGo or something. Try using Tor, here's how a VPN works, right? We go through those kinds of steps first. And then we say, well, if you want to really, dig into this stuff, if you want to really change your life, you can try, one of these GNU/Linux operating systems and sort of do that. But doing it on your phone is a much harder thing for people. And especially in places like the United States where people tend to get their phones with a phone plan and pay monthly for that. You may have bought a phone already that you're not going to be able to modify the way you need to make it more private. So I always say to folks, like, now that you know this, for your next phone, you need to think about that. You need to think about it, do a little bit of research and try to get a more private device, and then see if you can get a private operating system on there as well.
So we do have some questions from our viewers. This is coming from Rob Juno, and he is asking, what's the difference between the trackers you, Sean, mentioned and the ones in use with torrents?
Okay, so the term trackers from a BitTorrent have nothing to do with this. We mean trackers as in tracking, like spying, basically. It's just a euphemism for spying in one way or another. BitTorrent is a very efficient and wonderful way to download files. BitTorrent has a tracker, right, which keeps track of all of the bits and where they're located in the swarm, right, all of your peers and so on, to grab that file. So they use the term tracking just to say keeping track of where the file is. It has nothing to do with BitTorrent.
Okay. And then we do have another one from Propaganda, our friend Quinn. He asks, does Sean think that people should be coupling net neutrality with the need for free and open source in the marketplace? Seems like two important issues with similar goals.
Sure. So net neutrality is the idea, right, that you shouldn't have your traffic throttled or quote unquote shaped or changed just because of what you're using the network for. So yeah, that's an extremely, extremely important thing. And free and open source software is a transparency measure, right? So when I talk about free and open source software as being able to sort of liberate us and being a way that we can be more empowered and have more autonomy, it's through the idea that the software you're running, you can see what's going on. You know for a fact that there's not certain stuff in there that can be malicious and so on. Net neutrality in a similar way, right, allows you to have that transparency about network access. So you're not being throttled because there's not some intermediary, right, that's controlling some aspect of the way the traffic is moving. So that's net neutrality is an extremely important thing. What I will say, though, is that we've really never had net neutrality. And I do think there's a lot of disingenuous actors, including large, big tech corporations in the United States, that are using the term net neutrality to push their own agenda. ISPs, the Comcasts of the world want to control the pipe because they don't want to just move bits. There's not money, or there's not enough money in just moving bits. They want to control the content you see. They want to be able to push their own content. They don't necessarily like that Netflix has sort of taken away, a lot of their control over entertainment, and so on. And by the way, Netflix makes up a huge amount of the pipe, at least in the United States and many other countries as well now. So, I mean, those companies hate net neutrality because they need to have the government regulate the network in such a way that it's in their favor. And then the big tech companies, right, the Googles of the world and so on, they want to keep the net neutrality, or what they call net neutrality, the state of it more or less now, or more or less a couple of years ago, because they have their own agenda, right? So whenever I talk about net neutrality, it's a tough thing, because I try not to fall behind that wording too much, because I don't want to ally myself with the Googles of the world. We've never really had a pipe or a network that didn't have some sort of centralization and some sort of control. Our internet service providers have always exercised that control. And many of these companies that claim they care about net neutrality, like the Googles of the world, like the Amazons of the world, right? They're actually centralizing the internet in many other ways. So they're controlling massive amounts of content. They're controlling massive amounts of what goes on your phone, for example, in Google's case. And that's another type of undermining of the network. That's also not very neutral, right? That's also centralization that we don't need. We need a more decentralized web. So
Sean, I want to bring you back to WikiLeaks. And we were discussing before the show how interesting it is to people like us who are involved with Julian Assange that people are still discovering WikiLeaks, what they've done, what they've released. Can you talk about WikiLeaks and how they're different from a cybersecurity standpoint, what they're doing, how they're protecting their information, and how they're protecting their sources for people that don't know anything about that?
So WikiLeaks has always relied upon this stuff I call free and open source software. Most people call open source, but also software that uses smart encryption and anonymity, right? Uses the network in a way where you can't identify where traffic is originating from and where it's going. And that's always been something that's really important, obviously, for not disclosing sources. WikiLeaks has, of course, a way that you can disclose information using the Tor network and Tor browser, so that you can send them leaks. And the way in which it's done, basically, your data's bounced around the world, is the way I usually say, in a random way, and in such a way that each hop, right, along that chain, except for the gateway endpoint, they have no way of knowing, what the data you're sending is and what your intentions are, who you're trying to send it to. So that's the first thing where WikiLeaks has always had this very close relationship with, anonymity software and encryption software. And obviously, as time went on, the organization got much more savvy, and the technology around them got much better for being able to do this kind of anonymous and encrypted secret disclosure, right? But perhaps the most important thing WikiLeaks has ever done, which is, well, I don't want to say ever done, but ever done in this respect, like a cybersecurity respect and like keeping us all safe, was the Vault 7 and Vault 8 disclosures. That's a case that really proves, besides all the propaganda out there about how terrible WikiLeaks is for being so irresponsible and just releasing stuff, right? If you look at Vault 7 and you look at Vault 8, you get a really clear sense of their editorial practice and how responsible they actually are. Not that the other disclosures aren't, but this one at least is a little less close to the vest for the folks who are politically charged against WikiLeaks. I think people can look at the Vault 7 and look at the Vault 8 disclosures, and they're going to have a very hard time saying, they did something irresponsible there. Even if you're, a huge warmonger, you're not going to find, you're not going to be able to try to make that case when you look at this. And what I mean is, basically, Vault 7 was a disclosure of a massive amount of zero-day vulnerabilities and exploits. 0 days are vulnerabilities that are unknown to anyone until, the moment that they hit, the moment that they're disclosed. Meaning we had tons of software, we still do, I'm sure, but we had tons of software with massive holes in it put there by intelligence agencies in the United States, and also exploits that were bundled with those vulnerabilities and took advantage of those vulnerabilities. All this information was disclosed to WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks didn't just take that information and dump it on the internet, right? They knew that if that were done, it would cause a massive problem worldwide, economic problems, put a lot of people in danger, potentially even have deaths, right? You can have things like hospital infrastructures go out, communication infrastructures for emergencies and vital services go out when those kinds of tools, which of course, in this case, the CIA was hoarding, as cyber weapons. If those things get out, they can hurt a lot of people. So rather than dumping them and, being quote unquote, they were extremely responsible. They reached out directly to the companies that were affected, the Ciscos of the world, right? The Microsofts and so on. They worked with Mozilla and Firefox. And they made sure, they said, look, these exploits are there. They need to be patched. We have proof of concept code that we were given that show these things. We know where the holes are. You guys have to fix them. And we're going to talk about it. So the Vault 7 disclosures, we're talking about these things in a series of very well edited, posts about how, the organizational structure inside the CIA worked that developed this stuff, how they work, why they developed this stuff, what the vulnerabilities really were at a top level, right? Like, they spied on this aspect of your life and they ruined this piece of software, but without describing the mechanisms, right, that these vulnerabilities were exploiting, so that if someone were going to try to do something malicious, they wouldn't be able to do it. And then as time went on, they eventually, WikiLeaks eventually disclosed parts of the source code after the stuff was patched. That's basically what Vault 8 is. So that's the actual proof in the wild stuff that these cyber weapons exist. And it's just it's a great example of how transparency and radical transparency can really keep us safe. Unfortunately, in the cybersecurity world, the gatekeepers for exploits, right? The people who actually say this is the thing that is a 0-day and it's out there and it's a problem, those gatekeepers tend to have very close ties to the US government or contractors in the US government. And clearly there's cases where stuff isn't disclosed, right? And there are cases where things are purposefully kept secret so that cyber weapons can be used in the United States, sometimes against allies, which is another thing that Vault 7 kind of showed. The CIA had a little bit of egg on their face with allies in Germany, for example, because it was shown that a lot of this stuff was being done from inside the EU. And it was being done under false pretenses where they basically had agents who were pretending that they were doing one thing and they were actually doing something else, even in the territory of allies. So.
Well, and this is actually incredibly fascinating stuff. I've had Whitney Webb on my show a number of times now, and she's done a lot of digging into Israel's Unit 8200, which is essentially, there, you guys don't know, at home, it's the Israeli equivalent, more or less, of the NSA. And they've been involved in software startups and cybersecurity going back as far as or providing security products going back as far as the 80s, and have been spying on everyone using all of their products. Like, they've got the same backdoors built in that the CIA does. I would imagine this is a fairly common practice among global intelligence, but I don't have that particular information from me. I can say with absolute certainty that our intelligence agencies have done it, and so has the Israelis. But
yeah, I think there's a wink and a nod between these intelligence groups where they kind of know that they're spying on each other, right? So yeah, I'm sure not a lot of folks in the intelligence agencies were actually that, freaked out by the idea, or at least surprised by the idea that the U.S. would be doing this. But the scale of it's so huge. And of course, I mean, the US is the source of most of the software that people use, right? So we have a massive apparatus to develop, vulnerabilities, exploits, useful software that people are using with backdoors, as you mentioned, useful hardware designs that people, chipset designs and so on, and just putting backdoors and everything. It would be hard, and I know Israel is very, very good at this, as you mentioned, but it would be hard for them to keep up with us, the full might of the US in this way too, I'm sure. Although we know Unit 8200, as you mentioned, they worked together with the US on Stuxnet, which was the first real actionable cyber weapon in the wild, used against Iran and the nuclear program there. So,
Could you talk about some of the other uses that have gone public as cyber weapons that have happened over the past decade or so? Like Susnex is probably the biggest example, but what other ones could you highlight for us?
sure. So there are tons. The one that I'm, for whatever reason, fascinated with, but I think it continues to plague us in ways that a lot of folks aren't aware, are the shadow brokers leaks, right? These are, as far as we can tell, disaffected folks from within the NSA who took a cache of cyber weapons and basically slowly released it, or at least released it in batches on the web so that these things could be exploited. And the shadow brokers, probably the most pesky thing that still haunts us very, very much, that they released, was a vulnerability that allowed the thing we now call ransomware to persist. So there was a vulnerability in Windows networking called Eternal Blue. And Eternal Blue was basically a backdoor that would allow the propagation of ransomware code across Windows file sharing. It didn't have to be ransomware, but ransomware is particularly well suited because you can have a piece of code go through Windows networking, see all the shared drives of a large organization or a small organization, or your grandmother or something, and encrypt that information. So lock it up in the way I was talking about, but then hold it ransom, right? So now you say, if you don't send X amount of Bitcoin to this address, we're not going to give you back your data. Now, often there is no intention to give back the data at all, or the Bitcoin ransom may not even be collected, right? There may just be that they're propagating this stuff all over the place and not actually even watching to see if they get the money. This kind of thing's happening a lot, even just in my backyard now. So those, that a lot of that activity happened in 2017. And we're seeing school systems, in my neck of the woods, still dealing with this. Municipalities, we have a city around the corner from me that had to use typewriters. They had to fall back on using typewriters because they had a ransomware attack that just took down their entire network. And the reason this is interesting, sort of from a transparency and sort of a spy situation, there's two things here. The first one is, right, stockpiling cyber weapons is a problem for the same reason stockpiling nukes is a problem. The stuff can get out and then cause all kinds of nasty problems. And there's just an escalation as this stuff gets out and is used. And as the United States creates more and more weapons, they're making everyone less and less safe. Okay, stuff is going to get out, period. And when you have cyber weapons, they're going to be used by someone, especially if they're really powerful and really, quote unquote, useful for this kind of damage, right?
Absolutely.
Yep. So, and the second thing I'll say about it is the Eternal Blue leak is interesting because it was patched quietly and with no attribution by the NSA in Microsoft's exploit database. So if you go back and look, this is in March of 2017. If you go back and look, there was actually an exploit that was patched that there's just it doesn't say who the author was of the fix, right? It doesn't really give you an idea of the scope of the fix, but it was the NSA basically trying to patch this Eternal Blue exploit. And now the ransomware got smarter and has other ways of propagating now, but this was the primary delivery of this thing. Now, Microsoft clearly allows intelligence agencies this kind of access to their infrastructure. And they had canceled in the previous month their delivery of what they call Patch Tuesday. So their patch package to give the NSA time basically to come up with a fix for this thing and push it into their software. They knew that shit was going to hit the fan in April 2017, and they worked with the NSA to, you know, put this patch in quietly, right? And then when shit did hit the fan in April 2017, they go, "Oh, don't worry, everything's fixed because we have a fix for it. We can't tell you who did the fix, right? But it's out there." And the problem with that method of, you know, non-transparency, right, the method of even fixing a problem, is that a lot of folks didn't patch their systems. There was no sense in February and then March, you know, that this thing was coming from anyone but the people who knew, right, the NSA, the other intelligence agencies, and Microsoft in this case. So a lot of systems just weren't patched. And you had the UK health system go down almost completely, you know, with ransomware attacks around that time period. You had a lot of other, you know, companies and individuals be hurt worldwide by this. And it's a good example of how, you know, reckless it is to not only to have the cyber weapons, but to not have a real structure in place for fixing vulnerabilities. Now, in this case, the suspicion, of course, is that the NSA worked with Microsoft to create the vulnerability in the first place, and then they worked with Microsoft to patch it when the stuff got out, right? So that also shows that companies like Microsoft are working directly with the US government to either allow or help with the insertion of backdoors in their software. And we know that Microsoft, for example, has a shared source program, which is kind of like an open source program for spies, right? But everything else is closed source for us. So we can't tell what's being inserted and what's being done to us through Microsoft software. But you know, the spies know, because the spies are working directly to insert this stuff. So if I had to pick one example, the, you know, the Eternal Blue one, the shadow broker stuff is a really interesting example for that reason. There have been a number of other attacks that are worth mentioning. I will at least say this one, botnets, right? When you might hear the term botnet. This is remote control of devices like, you know, these IoT devices I'm talking about, your thermostats, your TVs, your DVRs for your television from your cable company, right? Botnets that control all these devices sit and wait for a really long time and then decide to turn the processing power of all these devices, which could be thousands or, you know, tens of thousands or more, against specifically quiet synths. But every once in a while you see these flare-ups where, you know, some corner of the internet or some corner of, you know, some network is taken down by these IoT devices that are all around us. As these devices get implemented in ways, like I said, just like your phone, they can't be modified. You're not able to see the code. You don't know what's on the thing. You don't know what vulnerabilities or exploits are on them, and they can't be fixed necessarily. The more and the more we're surrounded by these IoT devices, the more this kind of attack is also going to be a real danger. And I suspect we're going to see, as more IoT devices start taking over public infrastructure, so they're taking over, you know, traffic lights and, you know, traffic infrastructure and sidewalks, a place like Toronto where they're putting in all this smart stuff to control, you know, their entire city basically. There's sidewalk labs, right? Those are areas are going to be hit really hard, and it's going to be really dangerous to even go through your life in the public world, you know, with insecure devices all around you.
So we do have two questions from our friend Quinn, Propaganda. We'll ask one at a time though. He wants to know, does Sean think the CIA keeps Vault 7 with exploits so they can get free cyber warfare tools?
Sure. So yeah, that's pretty much the point, right? I think the important thing about Vault 7 from that perspective, like thinking about, you know, what the motivations are and so on. When Snowden was able to reveal to the world that the type of mass surveillance that a lot of people had suspected for a long time existed, not only existed, but was being used constantly to scoop up as much data as possible as it crossed the pipe, the thing we would call bulk interception or mass surveillance, right? When Snowden was able to reveal that, there was a shift in the US government away from that kind of surveillance. Not that they don't still do it, but they decided to shift to targeted surveillance. So an important part of the Vault 7 disclosures is that instead of being in the NSA, where it would traditionally be these units that would do this electronic snooping, a large unit was created inside the CIA, right, for this targeted surveillance. So now you have code running that's specifically attacking pieces of infrastructure, in the case of Cisco, routers, right, hardware and the software that runs on the hardware that sends our signals for the internet. And that was being targeted. Or an operating system like Windows is being targeted remotely. Or, we saw iPhones were being targeted very strongly and actually disproportionately to the number of iPhone users that are out there, especially when you look worldwide. So you say to yourself, well, why would iPhones be targeted so heavily? Well, a lot of powerful folks in the US and a lot of, quote unquote elites, right, use iPhones, folks who can afford them. And of course, it's a fashion thing, very fashionable to be in a place like Yale University and be using an iPhone. We pretty much see that almost exclusively in corners of the university. But anyway, the point is, you start seeing through the Vault 7 disclosures, not only that the CIA is purposefully hoarding this stuff, these backdoors, but that it's being done in such a way that you can figure out their intent. A lot of this is about surveilling the US population. Anything they say about it stopping terrorism or, doing, XYZ to protect the country and so on, maybe there's some tangential effect of that. I would argue against it, that it's making our lives more dangerous.
Can you please argue why it is making our lives more dangerous?
Sure.
Thank
So
you.
fundamentally, if we're using something like encryption, right, public-private key encryption, and we're talking to each other, having a conversation, there's some mathematics going on there that if you put a backdoor in that mathematics and you break that encryption scheme, it's broken for everyone, right? So you've not now just created a backdoor so that you can intercept the communications between two terrorists, right, that you may be trying to track, but you've now created a situation where that vulnerability exists, is out there in the wild, and is being used by millions and millions of people around the world. So economic infrastructure can be taken down this way. Everybody can be hurt by this action. So that's kind of why I liken it a little bit to nukes. I mean, the analogy is not perfect, but when these things are developed, these exploits are developed that hurt our networking protocols, hurt our hardware at a fundamental level. So, the firmware on a device that's shipped out to lots of people, they're not going to be used just by the quote unquote bad guys, whoever you think the bad guys are. They're going to be used, sorry, I should say good guys. They're going to be used by the bad guys as well, right? So it's not that technology is completely neutral, I don't think, in this way, but it's that when you create these weapons, they can be used by anyone who knows that the exploit exists there. The other thing I'll say about it is there's no reason we should assume that anything that's developed inside a Five Eyes intelligence agency, we shouldn't give any of it the benefit of the doubt, right? We've seen a long history of what actually goes on with the technology that is developed and the programs that are run out of these institutions. And those programs over and over and over again are being used to surveil the population of the country, to surveil populations of worldwide, global populations, not really for policing. Often the programs are designed in such a way that they're gathering so much information that there's not even good actionable intelligence. And when that actionable intelligence does come through, it's not even noticed, right? It's very hard to pick the signal out from the noise, so to speak.
Then, obviously,
yeah,
getting so
exactly.
much information. And I would argue, and I'm sure you would probably agree, and I think the co-hosts feel the same way, that terrorism is used as a guise to be able to do this. That's not really what they're after. And especially when there's a money motive attached to it, and the private industry is involved, and spying then becomes a business. Can you talk about that and the dangers associated with that, please?
Sure. So spying as a business, well, it is a booming business for the same reason that the military industrial complex is a business, right? The more people are connected to the internet, the more people are putting their entire lives online and using electronic devices for every aspect of their lives, the more opportunity there's going to be for companies to make their bread and butter by spying on that information and recording it. So yeah, it's become gigantic, and not just corporations that traditionally have close ties to the U.S. government. So I'm thinking of the folks in Tyson's Corner in Arlington, right outside of D.C. Not just those kinds of companies, but also startups, as I believe you mentioned earlier. There's a lot more startups which are saying, hey, we have this really unique way to surveil people that you may not have thought of, and we can do it, and we can do it really, really well, and that's our value add. And then they get invested in, and then they have close ties to some intelligence agency helping them to do that. Another important aspect of this too that I think we need to, and I don't know if I was clear about it, but centralizing information is a huge danger, right? So when the NSA has, and this is like an economic thing where they're scaling up, when they have these huge data centers like the one they've built now in Utah to just store massive amounts of traffic on the internet and to try to capture that data in real time, you've now got a huge amount of data on populations worldwide, but also, your population sitting in one place ready for attack or some sort of data breach. And, the concept I like to talk about here is data as a toxic asset, which I'm borrowing from a guy named Bruce Schneier, a very well-known cryptographer who's awesome at writing about these things. But centralizing this data, keeping more than you need in this case, like a bunch of stuff that, of course, the U.S. government could never act on, even if they were trying to, find every terrorist in the world, it becomes a danger. And the longer it sits there, it sort of gets more and more radioactive. And we see this in data breaches. We see it in, credit agencies that get breached, as we've had quite a few. When you're centralizing data and keeping lots of stuff you don't need, you're creating a danger for everyone worldwide, potentially. And one more little note, and thank you so much, by the way, for letting me sort of lecture a little bit here. I really enjoy it.
We really enjoyed the fact that you go into detail about it, so it's very mutual.
Okay, great. Thank you. Because often, you get interrupted in interviews and stuff. So this is really a nice, fun thing to be able to do this. So I appreciate it. But yeah, anyway, a good example of talking about sort of the relationship between policing and actually trying to find terrorists and, undermining privacy is the example of the FBI iPhone debacle a couple of years ago, where there was an attack in San Bernardino, right? And they had this iPhone that's locked, and the FBI wants to unlock this iPhone. And supposedly it's vital that the FBI get the data that's actually on the iPhone, on the disk, on the device, right? They have to get that information because it's vital for national security. And so they tried to undermine everybody who uses an iPhone, all of their security and privacy, by basically trying to force Apple to allow the FBI to impersonate Apple. So when I talked about like encryption and that mathematical relationship, it's a way that you can verify that you only allow certain parties to connect to your device. Everybody who has a phone from Apple has certificates on their phone that basically say, I allow Apple to essentially backdoor my phone so Apple can send software updates through whenever the heck they want. And, you know, I'm sure folks who use iPhones have been annoyed a few times by updates coming through in the middle of the night, or when they're trying to do something, or changing their phone completely, or in the case of, you know, the DRM with books, you know, they've removed books and things like that from people's devices by using this backdoor. But anyway, that's a tangent. The point is, Apple has this kind of power over the devices it sells. Now, let's say I say that's okay for whatever reason. I trust Apple for whatever reason, and that's the least of my worries, right? The FBI impersonating Apple to unlock these devices would have given them that kind of power over iPhones, you know, worldwide. And that's the thing I think they were really after. It wasn't just about breaking the encryption on the device or having control over that specific device. It was trying to force this corporation, which had allowed its users to go dark, right, from the FBI in this case, and you know, have a phone that can be locked from the FBI. They wanted to force that corporation to basically open the door for all iPhone users. And when you look at the situation, you say to yourself, well, one, the terrorist attack had already happened and, you know, been resolved badly, of course, right? You know, pretty awful thing. Terrorist attacks are terrible. But two, from a policing standpoint, what information was so valuable that they were going to get off of the device? They already had cell phone records about who these folks had been talking to, right? They had all of that metadata I was telling you about location and movements, and they probably know what these folks had for breakfast, and who the heck knows, right? The kinds of information that smartphones are constantly spying on us as individuals about, they're also spying on, you know, terrorists who are using these devices, right? So from a policing standpoint, what was of value to get out of that? Well, I don't see very much, and there's some good write-ups about this by others, but you know, it seems to me that the goal was not about policing. It was about making sure that everyone could be, you know, surveilled, whether they were doing something bad or not. And you'll find examples like this all of the time. There's a very good paper that I recommend to my students called Going Dark, or sorry, the Going Dark debate. It's out of the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard. It has that gentleman, Bruce Schneier, is one of the contributors, Jonathan Zittrain, a bunch of other really smart folks contributing to it. But they entertain the idea that some sort of surveillance may be necessary to stop terrorism. And then they say, well, is there really that much of a threat that these technologies that allow people to be anonymous, allow people to be private, are they going to undermine these goals? And I'll let you guys look at it and see what the conclusion is. You can probably guess, but you know, it's a very well even-handed works, and it gives some good arguments for why we don't need backdoors. We don't need encryption and anonymity to be broken, because if that stuff does happen, everybody gets less secure. So
I was actually in the tech industry when the whole iPhone debacle was going on with the shooting and all that. And if I remember properly, it was Apple apps actually refused to unlock the device, and the FBI went to a company called Cellbrite, which, for the people who don't know what Cellbrite is, they're an Iranian-based company that manufactures a data transfer machine. So you plug one cell phone into it, you plug the other cell phone into it, and it swaps the data from one to the other. And I may be wrong on this. This is just the way that I think I remember it. Apple refused the order, so the FBI had Cellbrite actually invent the technology for them to be able to backdoor into it. And then within a very short period of time, that got leaked out, and Apple had to then update their phones, because the FBI had hired a company to make a backdoor for their devices. So I don't know if that's completely accurate, but for what I understand working in the telecommunications field at the time, that's more or less how that played out.
yeah, so that's my understanding as well. So yes, you're right on the money. There's a very good write-up by a guy named Daniel Gilmore, who's at the ACLU in New York, but also Debian developers, done some work with some very important work with VPN technologies and so on. But anyway, he does a write-up saying this is probably the way that they unlock the phone. that actually goes into detail about a way that it could be done. But basically, it involves someone being able to trick the device into thinking that they're legitimately Apple, right, with some sort of certificate exchange, right, and then unlocking the device by pushing a software update to the phone. So they push a software update to the phone and the device unlocks. I don't know if it got rid of the ability for the phone to lock or what it did. But
I think what the trick was, they had the phone, when they did the initial handshake from Apple, had it tell Apple that it was on an older update version than it actually was on. So then it would try to kick the auto update in and then pull in a separate file that it would then put on the device. So I think that's how it worked, was um, basically tricking Apple into sending auto updates and then intercepting what actually got put in place.
So there you go, man. You're on top of it. Yeah, I don't fully recall the exact mechanism, but as you're saying, with this, them pretending to it was an older version and all this stuff, they're breaking the chain of trust of the device that was built into the firmware, right? And they came up with a very clever way to do that, and then that information got out, so Apple had to change the way that they did that. So I have mixed feelings about devices being locked down in that way in the first place, right? You can lock down a piece of hardware using secure boot or one of these, boot loader sort of schemes to make sure that your device can't have updates pushed to it and can only have the operating system on it that you tell it to have on it, right? And if the individual's doing that, if I'm taking a laptop and I'm putting the version of Linux on it that I want on it, right, and I lock down my machine in that way, great, right? But 9 times out of 10 you're going to get locked down from the manufacturer. So a lot of Android phones are locked down this way now. iPhones obviously are locked down this way. A lot of Microsoft devices, right? And they invented a lot of this stuff for secure boot, specifically to keep the ability for people to replace Windows, right? They didn't want people to replace Windows. So then they locked down the devices in this way in the name of security. So the other flip side of the coin is, if we have to worry so much about police and intelligence agencies and bad actors or actors of any kind trying to take our devices and get into them when we don't want them in them, are we going to then have to accept the fact that we get devices we have no control over, right? Where the software is pushed to us in such a way that we just have to accept what Apple gives us, and that's better than having the FBI to have the ability to unlock our phone, right? So it's something I wrestle with a little bit, and I don't have high hopes that we're moving in a positive direction. I think we're seeing more and more devices being specifically related to the software that can run on them, right? So again, to go back to Microsoft devices, this is the kind of thing that Microsoft was being called out for being a monopoly for, right, in the late 90s and early 2000s. But now everybody's doing it. Tablets are tied to a specific operating system. Chromebooks are tied to a specific operating system. Windows Surface machines are tied to a specific operating system. Apple devices are very much locked into the Apple ecosystem in a number of different ways. And it's not a very good, empowering, positive thing for devices to be unhackable, meaning unmodifiable by their users. So I worry very much about that. And, time will tell. We are also seeing some pushback in some devices that are very, modifiable and hackable. But then the question is, how long will it be legal for us to lock down our devices in a way where a large US corporation is not ultimately in control of it, right? So my weird phone with my own ROM on it that's locked down in the way that I made it locked down, is that sort of thing going to become illegal? Quite possibly, right?
I actually think that's a basic Second Amendment question, but we are going to transition over. So I'm going to hand it over to Taylor for some closing questions and moving us over into news.
Okay. Yeah. So before we do touch on or really discuss in great depth the recent hearing that took place on Monday, October 21st, one last question before you head out, Sean, and that is, what sort of apps or programs do you recommend people download just for a basic level security?
Sure. So everyone should be using Tor browser in some way, shape, or form. So if you can use a Tor browser on a desktop, make sure you get it from the Tor project directly. Okay, on an Android phone, there's something called Orbot or Orfox, which is the Firefox version. They're now transitioning to having an official version of Tor browser for Android. And then also there's something called Onion browser, but you have to be very careful, make sure it's the correct one. So please do your homework a little bit ahead of time because there's a bunch of fake versions of it with similar names on iPhones. So that's a good start to at least knowing that when you're going out to a website, your internet service provider can't spy on you. If you're in a college dorm or something, your university is not able to see what you're doing. But also just for like basic level security, you know the stuff's encrypted and encrypted well. You know that the site you're reaching out to doesn't know anything about your identity, which means they can't deduce things about you. You can't use it all the time, but that's great. Use an ad blocker and use a serious ad blocker. There's some really good ones out there. uBlock or MuBlock. It's got a little lowercase u or like the mu sign in math. That's a great one to use for Firefox or Chrome/Chromium. You can use Better. Better blocker is made by a great team up in Ireland that really thinks very consciously about security, and they've got stuff in the App Store for iPhones, etc. So I would use those. I still believe that Signal is a reasonably good tool for folks, although you have to use your phone number and let people know what your phone number is in Signal, which is a problem as the identifier. But if you're willing to share a phone number with someone else and they're willing to share their phone number with you, it does set up a good end-to-end encrypted connection between the two of you. So Signal's great. Wire's another good messenger that I really like. It doesn't have this issue of having to exchange phone numbers. You can create a username that has nothing to do with you in real life, right? But just keep in mind that that username is queryable, like kind of like a public telephone directory in the app. So you want to make sure you use a name, you know, if you want to actually be anonymous that has nothing to do with you, and maybe some sort of burner account, you know. And then, yeah, encrypted email is great. It can be a real pain to set up. Email by sort of definition, or by the way it's traditionally set up, is not designed to be great in keeping the content of your message secret. But there are some good providers out there. One of the ones I really like right now is Tutanota, and they've got a great team out of Europe. There's ProtonMail, of course, which a lot of folks talk about. I've heard mixed things about them recently, so you know your mileage may vary. Read up a little bit, and also, you know, there are good, serious providers that do a good job. MailFence is the one we're currently using at PrivacySafe out of Germany. We, of course, know how to scramble our stuff before we send it through their servers, right? Using something called GPG or PGP. If you can go to the lengths of learning about that, and there's lots of good tutorials out there on the internet on how to do that, that's something that's really empowering. And that's a technology that you can bring with you into the future. It's not going to change very much over time, and you're not necessarily tied into one platform. So those are the handful of things. Make sure you encrypt your hard drives, right? Make sure you do good backups. Part of the problem we're trying to solve with PrivacySafe is making that sort of action, syncing data, making sure it's encrypted, and doing it in such a way where you can still share with other individuals in a private, anonymous way. You know, that's something that people need to do as well. You want to know that if you ever get your stuff taken at a border crossing, that, you know, you can pretty much consider it a burner device because you have a synced, reliably encrypted copy elsewhere. So.
Okay, well, are there any last statements or thoughts you want to leave off on? And then also, if you could let everybody know where they can find you on social media.
Sure. So just thank you so much for letting me talk this whole time. I will say, you know, if you care about these issues at all, WikiLeaks has been really, really important. I mentioned Vault 7, but they've done some other disclosures that are definitely related to this. But the underlying concept of sort of radical transparency, transparency for the public good, is extremely, extremely important in this context. Things are going to get nastier, not worse, and maybe they'll get worse before they get better if we're lucky. But you know, cyber warfare is something that's picking up steam, to put it mildly. And we need organizations like WikiLeaks to be a very positive, shining force there. And of course, that means we need Julian. So we need Julian Assange. And hopefully, all goes well there. I am very concerned with what I've seen in the past few days. So we need to make sure we support him and support WikiLeaks generally. Finding me online. So PrivacySafe is the organization I'm working the hardest on right now. So you can find that at PrivacySafe AI on Twitter, and then PrivacySafe.ai on the web. You can find me at either Yale Privacy Lab on Twitter or Sean O'Diggity on Twitter. It's a nickname from a while back. I use Mastodon. I use all kinds of other stuff, so I'm pretty easy to find. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise. But we are going to transition to the news portion of the vigil. However, you are absolutely welcome to stick around if you would like to. We're going to be just talking about the recent court appearance in the court hearing, because Assange was actually physically present in court. So we'll be discussing that, and you are welcome to stick with us. But thank you again, Sean, so much for coming on.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, everybody. That was Sean O'Brien. And we are now moving forward, like I said, to the news portion. And unfortunately, this is when things, we don't really have a whole lot of positive things to say tonight. We are going to touch on some articles and discuss what some of the people who attended the hearing, what they have to say about that, and how they viewed Julian Assange, because again, this was one of his court appearances where he was actually present and he wasn't just attending via a video link. And unfortunately, it seems that his mental condition is deteriorating, and all of us are extremely concerned about this. This is very serious, and we're going to talk about this. So I do want to open it up to my co-hosts. If any of you guys want to pick it up here and, maybe describe what happened on Monday. I think we're going to start with the Craig Murray article. And he is a friend of Julian, and he was there in court and was able to see him. And he provided some pretty alarming, to put it kindly, statements about Assange's condition. So I'll open it up to you guys.
I kind of want to preface it. I was up and watching the Ripley feed, and Gordon Dimmick had a live feed going on. A lot of the beginning of both feeds were waiting for Julian to arrive, and journalists, reporters hoping to get some sort of photo or video footage of him in the police van. This has happened before in his other court appearances. It hasn't happened in a few months, though. So a lot of people were really eager to see him in person. I lost count of how many decoy vans there actually was that morning. There was something about watching the Ripley journalists put the camera to the window, and you watched it focus, and I think everybody was holding their breath every single window, because I think everybody was bracing themselves for what they were going to see. And unfortunately, we didn't see him before he went into the courtroom. We think maybe he was snuck in the back way with all these decoy vans. But the amazing thing during all of that was that we got to hear and see the protesters there and the crowd that showed up at the courts. At one point, the police even went up to them and tried to get them to move. I think there was some words exchanged about them blocking the door, and they were very firm and stood tall. The yellow vest from France showed up. That was an amazing addition. So yeah, that was a really, I would say the only uplifting thing we saw was the turnout there. So as most of you know, I help with the Unity4J Twitter account. And so a lot of times during these hearings, I am watching Twitter hashtags, looking for anybody who is in the courtroom and is relaying any information out, because we don't have a live feed. We don't have photographs of Julian. We don't even really get transcripts. I mean, what we have is what people could hear, and what they could hear wasn't much. And that's because Julian had such a hard time talking. Julian could barely say his name. He could barely get his birth date out. But he did have some statements towards the end. And really, John Pilger had an interview today. He said he saw him on Thursday and they discussed what Julian was going to say. So he said he knew Julian must have practiced those words. But unfortunately, it was still very difficult for Julian to get those things out. And I'm sure most of you who are watching this, and if you haven't, I challenge you to watch an interview with Julian Assange and how quickly, like Sean was saying, how quickly he can bring things up, how easy it is for him in these past interviews to talk about all these complex subjects. So to put it in perspective of a man who can no longer say his birth date at the drop of a hat, who can no longer express how upsetting this court process is that he's been able to express for years now, it's very alarming.
I'm gonna put the Craig Murray article up on the screen, because a lot of what you were just talking about is highlighted here. Will you scroll down for me? Thank you. There's a couple of quotes in here that are totally worth mentioning, and I should probably make the screen a little bigger. Do it. Not that much. There we go. Sorry. I'm practiced. I want to start here with until yesterday, I had always been quietly skeptical of those who claimed that Julian's treatment amounted to torture, even of Nils Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, and skeptical of those who suggested he may be subject to debilitating drug treatments. But having attended the trials in Uzbekistan of several victims of extreme torture and having worked with survivors from Sierra Leone and elsewhere, I can tell you that yesterday changed my mind entirely, and Julian exhibited exactly the symptoms of a torture victim brought blinking into the light, particularly in terms of disorientation, confusion, and the real struggle to assert free will through the fog of learned helplessness. That is, I'm gonna take it back to the panel here now. Learned helplessness is a horrific notion, but it is a very realistic thing. And I talked about it a little bit on Slow News Day last night. But it's the desired goal of isolation and institutionalization is learned helplessness. It's also, to a degree, the way that massive centralized government operates. Does anybody follow what I'm saying here?
Yes. Learned helplessness, I believe, is a actual specific term that's used in psychology, that after you put somebody in certain, and I could be botching this, but after you put somebody in certain conditions where they literally cannot help themselves, it becomes a learned behavior that they're kind of stuck in this scenario. I know that there's a more articulate way to put that, but again, the fact that Craig Murray was even skeptical of Nils Melzer's assessment that Assange was being subjected to torture, and that it completely changed, his mind was completely changed after seeing him, is really telling of the bad conditions that he's in. And it also suggests too that this is obviously getting worse and that this is not getting better, therefore indicating that there is a concerted effort to harm him. And I think Steve, you spoke about this last night too, about them medicating him, I believe, correct? And how that's obviously having a huge impact. But the fact that, as Christy was saying, the fact that he is unable to say his birth date, that's something that you know, that's one of the first things you learn about is your birthday. Everybody knows their birthday. That is something that you can say like that. The fact that he had to think about that and he couldn't even speak and say his birthday is really an indicator that this is not good. And again, we don't want to scare people, but again, we do want to highlight and really illustrate for you guys that this is an issue that's a matter of urgency, and that we can't wait around for people to say that they'll discuss it later, specifically politicians who say, oh, we'll get to that. Yes, Monday's court hearing in his condition should really show everybody and prove to everybody that that is not an acceptable response anymore.
And I want to real quick, I want to highlight what it was that Julian Assange had to say when, as John Pilger suggested, he had practiced and wanted to get out no matter what. So I'm going to put it back on the share screen here real quick. And the what, 3-4 sentences, the paragraph that he was able to get out, I do not understand how this process is equitable. This superpower had 10 years to prepare for this case, and I can't even access my writings. It is very difficult where I am to do anything. These people have unlimited resources. And that's true. That's true.
It highlights their desperation. Like, it highlights not even the amount of power that Julian himself as a person has, but just the amount of power and impact that letting someone tell the truth has. Because this just serves literally just as an example, like to any like would-be journalist or would-be whistleblower that's sitting out there on the fence. And it just turns into this situation of, am I willing to become the next Julian Assange? And people have to then process that, like, to the point that they have to sit there and think, do I want my family members to see me even appear this way in court or have to go through this? Or could I even survive 7 years in solitary confinement? So it's just this whole thing is designed in the way that Ron Flacone described it as an Orwellian execution, to where they want the world to see what's happening to this man because they feel like they have so much power that there's nothing anyone can do to stop them. And we have to prove them wrong. Like, we have no other option at this point. Like, when I watched the video of the camera getting put up there and just seeing the light click on, you could see just the pain in Julian's face, but he just knew that he wanted to sit there with his eyes open to show the camera that even in that circumstance, Julian still has the force of will to say, like, no, I'm willing to be pained in this way just to try to seem strong. And if you watch it all the way to the end, you see him try to communicate something. And I wish I knew how to read lips better so I could see what it was. But he just starts tearing up, and I don't know by watching it if it's from the light shining in on him or if it's from what he was trying to say. But either way, like, the only reason that that's allowed to be seen, even from Rupley, the one organization that got it, is because it's a warning shot that if anyone else does this, they're the next Julian. And even putting ourselves up in this fashion makes us the next Julian. Like, expressing this information and sharing classified information.
But look,
with
that's
people.
the point.
It's
That's the whole goddamn point. That was a direct request, from Julian Assange himself. Like, somebody needs to go out and do this. Be my voice. I don't have one. Okay, let's do that.
So as far as the court decisions, there were some motion, or not motions, but the defense did try to present some arguments. I don't believe that they were successful. Christy, I know you wanted to touch on this before we did show those video clips.
Yeah, let's get into that goddamn judge.
Right.
Right.
So some of the requests they were making, there was two big requests. One was to have a very standard 3-month delay. And they were asking this specifically because of the Spanish security system or security company court case that's going on in Spain. There's evidence they want to use that the CIA was infiltrating Julian's life. They were violating his lawyer-client privilege. So they want to use evidence from that trial into the extradition hearing. They are concerned that by February, they may not be able to have that evidence. So that's why they were specifically asking for this delay to collect new evidence. That was denied. The other big thing that they were trying to get was an additional hearing to even really go over the extradition hearing and how this case should be thrown out. Even before going to a full extradition trial, talking about the treaty, the request from the US, and why it's not applicable, and why it doesn't qualify under the UK-US treaty. That was also denied. Craig Murray's article does a good job of painting the picture of the United States of America having 5 members sitting behind the judge and basically controlling and ordering the US prosecutor what to do, and how the judge was very accommodating to the US's side and not so warm and friendly to Julian's defense. So Steve, if you want to bring that up, if you want to point anything out there.
I believe it was the UK-US extradition treaty of 2003 that they were trying to address, because it prohibits the extradition of an individual based on political reasons. But the judge, like Christy was saying, did deny that because I guess her claim, or her ruling in this, or not ruling, but her claim in this was that he's being tried under the Espionage Act of 1917. Which again, a common theme in this is that, of course, this is a very outdated and antiquated act that is still being implemented in this case.
So let me drop that down here. And yeah, the at a certain point there was a recess. The defense team was given, basically 10-15 minutes to try and talk some sense into Judge Barriester. I said it so wrong yesterday. God damn it. But yeah, after the recess, the defense team stated they could not, in their professional opinion, adequately prepare if the hearing date were kept to February, but within Barrester's instruction to do so, they nevertheless outlined a proposed timetable on the delivery of evidence. In responding to this, Lewis is the prosecutor, his junior counsel scurried back to the back of the court to consult the Americans again, while Lewis actually told the judge he was taking instructions from those behind. It is important to note that as he said this, it was not the UK Attorney General's office who were being consulted, but the US Embassy. Lewis received his American instructions and agreed that the defense might have 2 months to prepare their evidence. They said they needed an absolute minimum of 3, but the February hearing date may not be moved. Barrister gave a ruling agreeing everything Lewis had said. Okay, I'm gonna continue here real quick because this is absolutely nuts. At this stage, it was unclear while we were sitting through this farce, the US government was dictating its instructions to Lewis, who was relaying those instructions to Barrister, who was ruling decision. This charade might as well have been cut, and the US government simply sat on the bench to control the whole process. nobody could sit there and believe they were in any part of a genuine legal process, or the berater was giving a moment's notice, moment's consideration to the arguments of the defense. Her facial expressions on the few occasions she looked at the defense ranged from contempt through boredom to sarcasm. When she looked at Lewis, she was attentive, open, and warm. And we're back to the Brady Bunch view.
Yeah, so she's not even hiding her judgments here, of course, because there's no repercussions for doing so. She doesn't have to even pretend that she is weighing both sides equally. She's clearly in favor of the prosecution side, as we had suspected. But I think that, and I'm not exactly sure, I'm guessing that the US officials who were there had to be there because it's a case that involves the United States, obviously. But I would imagine that that would put so much pressure on everybody that was there, just having the United States officials be there, not to make an excuse for the prosecutors, but I can't imagine that, you know, you could expect to have a fair hearing when you have the US, you know, officials and basically representatives of the US empire right there.
So I
And
wanna
this
make
is no
2 more
different.
points.
Oh, go ahead.
2 more points before we get to the footage. So when Julian spoke at the end and talking about his inability to access documents and inability to think, in light of what we read about the judge, she also did not seem to care about his conditions and said that this hearing was not related to his conditions. That wouldn't be addressed here. And when asked, the judge asked Julian if he understood things, his first response was not really. And her answer back was, well, I'm sure your lawyers will explain it to you. So both very cruel and blunt responses to a person who is trying to understand, and you know, maybe things are moving too quickly or would just like the chance to take a breath and figure out what's happening. The other thing that was decided, so I mentioned that the 3-month delay was rejected. The judge decided to move the trial in February to Belmarsh magistrates. This was incredibly upsetting to so many people in the gallery, because it is known that I don't know how many courtrooms there are there, but the biggest one only has, I've heard, 5 to 6 public seats.
Yeah.
This Belmarsh is outside of London and is a little bit, I think, more secluded, a little bit harder to get to than the West Magistrates Court in central London. This is isolating this trial. The judge said this would somehow make it easier for the press or make it easier for Julian so he doesn't have to travel. We have talked specifically that the US will not allow his extradition, once he's extradited here, allow a trial to be accessible to anybody. We're experiencing this in the UK. They are not going to let anybody see him. They are not going to let the press in. His family members will be lucky to get in and get those 5 seats, let alone his supporters, let alone reporters who will do an honest job at covering the events. This is incredibly isolating, it's cruel, and it's a show trial. It's a joke.
Yeah, they're obviously trying to make sure that press doesn't have adequate access to this trial. They don't want people to know about it. So it is kind of strange. At the same time, we've been talking about how they do want to make an example of Assange and they want to show certain clips of him to make people fearful of following in his footsteps. Yet at the same time, when it comes to the legal aspects of what's really happening and how the legal process is being completely disregarded, of course, they do not want the media, or those in authority do not want the media to be there. But again, I think that's a great point to bring up. We often talk about how in the United States, he will not obviously receive a fair trial, and we won't learn much about what's going on during the trial because it's, of course, a national security case. But now that this extradition hearing is going to be basically secluded and not being held in the public eye, I mean, it brings up a whole nother set of issues along with this case.
They also discussed there's supposed to be 5 days to the trial, and there was some discussion saying there would only need to be 2 days. And so
how do you have 2 days for
because that's how
really
long
may
it
not
takes.
result in anything but a ruling that's already sitting and waiting for him, honestly.
right?
Caitlin Johnstone has another tremendous piece of writing up in Medium, and it is titled "Only Cowards and Sadists Support the Persecution of Assange." I'm gonna pull up the quote from Julian's lawyer that's mentioned in this article real quick. We're over on the share screen. Assange's lawyer, Mark Summers, told the court that the case was a political attempt by the United States to signal to journalists the consequences of publishing information. End quote. And of course, he's right. Nobody sincerely believes that the 175-year sentence that Assange is looking at if he's successfully extradited to the US by the Trump administration is a reasonable punishment for publishing activities which the Obama administration had previously declined to prosecute based on the exact same evidence, citing concern for the damage to the press that the precedent would do to press freedoms. These charges have nothing to do with justice, and they aren't meant to be merely punitive. They're made to serve as a deterrent to journalists anywhere in the world who might otherwise see fit to publish inconvenient facts about the US government. And we're back. There's nothing about that her observations there that you can argue with. We've known this the entire we've known this the entire time. But even some people in corporate media have noticed that they could potentially be on the chopping block for this thing. And that's the point. There are people who make their living on YouTube through ad revenue, through super chats, with a Patreon, who will not risk loss of revenue to extensively cover Julian Assange, put Julian Assange's name in the title of a video, come on a show that promotes awareness and direct action in relation to what is happening to Julian Assange. And if he is successfully murdered by the intelligence communities from this country, from the UK, it doesn't matter whose soil that happens on. It is a collective assassination. If that takes place, those guys' ability to do what they do goes away. At any point, if they say something that the US government decides is too far, they are open to the exact same process that Julian Assange would have gone through. For them to walk around it or not jump in with both feet, screaming the death of press freedom is right over our heads. We should do something about that. Why that isn't happening in every corner of independent media is just, it's so maddening.
And you hear excuses from creators and from people that watch the creators and all this about, oh, those videos don't get many views, this, that, and the other thing. when we all know about the shadow banning that goes on behind the scenes. We all know about how notifications don't get pushed through. And so all that means, if you make a Julian Assange video as a creator and it gets half as many views, it means post the video in 2 parts, because then at least it'll still be seen the same number of times. You'll still get the same amount of revenue off of it. So it's even just using little strategies like that as content creators that don't take much more effort. It's just chopping a video into 2 parts instead of putting it all up as one.
And I think it's
And
even more than just
well,
Go ahead. Sorry.
well, it's fear that if they start putting out this content, that they're going to get put into that blacklist, and that they're going to be seen as that outside creator that, like, the mainstream democratic sphere no longer is going to want to talk to or work with or be influential over. And a lot of it has to do with access journalism, trying to be able to get a hold and get in contact with these people. And you can't, like, there's no way to hold these people, people in political positions of power and people in positions of influence, accountable unless these videos are made and unless these things are talked about. And so as viewers of that content, myself included, messaging and commenting about, hey, make more videos about Julian, or hey, in this video you could have included this fact about Julian Assange in it, or hey, instead of using this information as your source, you could have used WikiLeaks, where this information came from originally. So it's things like that, trying as viewers of content to push the creators to then make that content because it's that important. Because the 4 of us know, just watching the numbers behind the scenes individuals and behind the scenes on personal YouTube accounts, they lie about the numbers all the time. The public number is completely different than the number that you see inside of the YouTube portals, which is different than the number that you see inside of your channel itself. So there's not even a way to accurately gauge how many people are seeing unless you kind of just use one of the numbers all the time. So it's insane to me that there's not more coverage about this, but you see videos about Kamala Harris and all of the horse and pony bullshit going on, when there's, like, literally someone's life hanging on the line and the rights of the entire planet essentially sitting on the line.
And
Yeah.
Steve brought this up last night, that the timing of the extradition hearing is conveniently at the same time that primary season is kicking off, and that we could be in the middle of an impeachment trial. So there'll be lots of things to be going on in the news and discussing instead of this extradition trial.
Yeah, and like, because Craig Murray in his article poses that question, like, why, if anyone has any ideas why the February 25th is a hard and fast date, let me know. It's peak primary season. It is right before Super Tuesday, like the week before Super Tuesday. There will be more than likely impeachment proceedings taking place in the House of Representatives. There is there's no better time than when people need to work their ass off to make up for all that money they spent over Christmas, because sometimes that takes 3 or 4 months for, while the primary is going on, while impeachment's going on. There's so many things that can be used as a distraction. And if we're only seeing footage from Rupley every always, or God bless Gordon Dimmick for doing what he does and going down and talking to people, it's without that, there's no coverage. You're not going to see a US outlet over there. You're not. They want this done in the dark. If somebody does cover it, it will be after the fact as a victory lap. And
then that's when all the
so
political
gross.
statements come out. That's when everyone says, oh, I supported this man so much. Oh, I looked at him as a hero. Oh, he should be an American icon. And that's wrong.
It
Like,
is wrong.
Can can we transition, because this is kind of a good point to bring up Bernie Sanders' recent statement?
I wanted to make one point though. This
Okay.
is more than just quickly. This is more than just about getting likes and getting views and making money. Of course, I understand people do make a living off of YouTube, but at the same time, this issue is so important that it's more important than likes on a video. It just is. And unfortunately, we have to talk in those terms when it comes to this case, but learning the facts of this case and learning what's happening, it's important that it's covered. And I see it as an obligation for people in independent media to not only cover it, but when they do cover it, to not use sources that are from mainstream media. Because if you do, you're going to get incorrect information and you're going to be promoting that incorrect information. Okay.
I'd like to show the clips of Julian if we can. If we can pull, there's two of them. And as now we know, originally it appeared that the crowd got to gather around the van and cheer, and everyone was very thankful that Julian got to see and hear them. But as we saw later when the replay footage came out, that was not the same van. And so the story is that he was being held in the court for about 2 or 3 hours after the end. And Rupley found him kind of off sitting. I'm not sure how far away that was, but we don't really have any confirmation that he was in the van that the supporters gathered around. And so that is another decoy incident that was used to manipulate the situation, to manipulate the supporters, to manipulate people watching, thinking, oh, thank God, he got to see the crowd. He got to hear them. That has to lift his spirits. I cannot confirm by just watching that footage, multiple pieces of footage, that he was there, that he got to hear the crowd. And that's extremely disheartening. And it shows how manipulative the UK is being with this. So
yeah,
Steve,
I think a lot of us were hopeful that he was exposed to that, but we don't even know if he was in that van.
And that's part of the psychological campaign against the public and also against Julian. Because if they park him on a van in a side street 10 blocks away, 12 blocks away, and he can't hear or see the crowds, that, I don't want to say that makes him think that they're not there, but that puts that fear in him, that puts that terror in him, that are they not showing up? Because he can't see them in the courtroom, he can't see them on the streets, he gets the letters super infrequently. And then when we get fed a fake van, we as like the functioning public that's aware of what's going on, that just gives us this sense of false hope, because there's less people now that will know that Julian wasn't in that van than people that are. And it gives the people a sense like, hey, at least we could reinforce that and show them that it was there. When the whole time that was just a ploy to try to give people some emotional response in a good way to ease down the tensions that are happening. Like, it's this whole
Exactly.
psychological shit show that's going on to manipulate people at every level, whether you're part of the public or whether you're the person in prison. So it just drives me insane. Like, but Steve says he has the clip pulled up.
I've got the clip of him in the van, but
there are two clips
yeah,
of
it's
him
the
in the
same.
van.
It's
Is
the
it the same
same
one? Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead and show the first one, and I can see which. I can pull out the other one.
All right. That's how you do that. And watch again. Wow.
Yeah, Steve, this second link is the other clip.
We're back on Brady Bunch. I'll try it again. Yeah, that's the one I just played.
Okay. Well, there is a second clip of him, and then the van pulls away.
Yeah.
So I want to say something about this. And throughout my work as an activist, I've tried to be very uplifting. I've tried not to worry just to worry, and I've tried not to be alarming. But I want people to realize this may be the last time you see Julian Assange alive. Because the next two hearing dates in November and December are video link. The extradition trial will be at Belmarsh, so there will be no van carrying him to get roughly there to get that shot. And then, there will be some sort of appeals process, but that could be months. John Pilger said to RT this morning that could be late next year, late end of next year. I don't know if Julian's current state, if he has that much time. And I say that, and I don't want to be alarming, but at the same time, I want people to understand how serious this is when we say we don't have time to dick around and say, oh, it's not a voter issue. We can't talk about it. It's isolating the candidate. Voters don't care. Well, this man is dying, and you may never see him alive again. And it's time to start caring, because if you don't care now, the Julian Assange that we all know and love, and the reason we know so much about WikiLeaks, the reason we support him, his mind is being destroyed. And I'm not sure, even if he makes it through all this, if he will ever be the same. And that's incredibly heartbreaking to me, because the world is losing an incredible intellect, and people don't seem to fucking care. And it drives me mad, honestly.
I couldn't agree with you more. That's what frustrates me so much about the lack of wall-to-wall coverage about this. And I want to take a moment to highlight the people who are doing good work on this, that at least that I'm aware of. And if there's more, there's some comments on the video I did yesterday that name a couple of people, and I don't have that in front of me right now. But first and foremost, our friend Gordon Dimmick, Misty in the chat said she would fight me for Gordon. Misty, okay, we could dance. That's cool. But Gordon does just consistent and incredible work covering what's going on with Julian Assange. Jason Burmis, who is a friend of the vigil here, he covers Julian Assange. And then Jimmy Dore and crew, Ron Placone and Graham Elwood, they all do a consistent job discussing Julian Assange. What kind of bugs me a little bit in the case of Jimmy Dore with his 650,000 subscribers is that more often than not, his coverage of Assange is behind some sort of paywall. And whether that's the Patreon or a comedy club, you to get the consistent coverage, you have to pay for that. And that's the only thing that's marginally disconcerting about that. But they're doing good work about it. So having said that, there are just too many people that don't. And I don't necessarily want to turn this into kicking around every content creator on the planet. But I would like to suggest that if you are a fan of someone's show and they don't talk about Julian Assange is that you know, politely, fairly frequently, like, hey, why don't you talk about this?
Or even just share the information with them too. Like don't even put it on them to do the research to find the articles and the information from an independent source. Give it to them. Like, because we see the links. Like the sphere of social media has become so censored that it's the same couple 1,500, 3,000 people that we interact with every day, like that see those same tweets and move them around, and you can watch them because you end up following the group of people that Twitter lets you see or Facebook lets you see. So the content creators, and I just hope that it's them out of some kind of fear or concern or just lack of understanding of the situation. I hope that if people start giving them the articles, that it puts it in front of them, because they may not see every article that comes through because their feeds aren't filled with Julian Assange information. They're filled with the progressive Democrat information and what AOC is saying and stuff like that. Um, so share the articles directly with them and say, hey, I want you to cover this. And maybe super chat them and give them $2 and say, hey, cover this. Because that's something, not that money makes them talk, but that's what they see and it gets put in front of them. Because that's something that I try to do. Like if I see someone going live with a Julian Assange video, I try to hop in personally and throw them $2 and say, hey, thanks for covering this. No one else does. So it's just little things that we can all do that maybe they don't get as many clicks on the video, but if they do a live stream, they get twice as many super chats. So it's things like that that we can do as consumers of content that are more influential, like sharing it, like promoting those videos, sharing those videos specifically in your own content and tagging those creators in it. Just creative solutions.
Yeah, if you ask them to cover this information, it incentivizes them to do so, because if there is a motive to want to get more likes, of course, which is a natural thing, by being a viewer and by telling them that you want to see this, that makes them more likely to cover it. And also oftentimes, you know, we follow Assange in his case very closely. Many of the creators do not. So sometimes they are not even aware of major things that are taking place. So don't just assume that they know. Let them know on Twitter, let them know in the chat, hey, this is going on tomorrow, or hey, you know, you may want to cover this hearing that's going to be taking place on Monday or whatever. Do those things. Don't just assume that they know about them. It doesn't hurt. And the more people that do this, the more likely it's going to be that they're going to cover this. And remember that that's also a form of activism as well, too, is by getting people in independent media to cover this. Because I believe in Caitlin's article, she also makes the point to say that combating the narrative is a big part of being successful in this case.
And it can't just come from like World Socialist websites. You know, it has to be everyone with a voice. It has to be everyone with a vested interest in being able to relay information that may be optically damaging to the government, as in they've committed war crimes, or optically damaging to a corporation, as in they're, you know, harvesting your brainstem. I don't know. It's vital to, it's so vital to do that. I'm getting off track here because there's a very low flying helicopter and I'm wondering if you can hear it. But yeah, no, I lost it. The helicopter weirded me out. It's dark. That might mean fire. So somebody.
Oh, geez. Yeah, no, we can't
So
hear it.
So can we talk for a minute about Bernie Sanders' statement, and do we have that to pull up?
I can grab it.
And I don't wanna like put thoughts in before anything's like said about it, but I just want people to pay attention to how things are worded, and then I'm gonna kind of try to relate it to just the way other people in the political sphere would word something like this. And we lost Christy. She said she'll be right back.
Okay, this takes a sec.
No
But
problem.
as you're
But
loading, as he was loading that, I just wanted to reiterate the point that don't assume that that creators know what's going on with the Assange case. Make sure that you tweet out about it, and don't feel that you're just one person doing it. If all of you do it, it's really effective. Andrew, you could go ahead. I was just trying
yeah,
to
no,
fill
I
out
was
some
going to
time
say,
here.
Christy had mentioned earlier that we don't have time to wait for people to give a half-mouth statement, or for people to just kind of skirt around an issue, or wait until it becomes a politically acceptable idea, because that'll never happen. Like the consequences and the circumstances around freeing Julian Assange ultimately create an argument about the war criminals themselves and the process that he's been put through and all of these other details and factors. So when someone brings stuff like that up, there's a larger issue that's at play that never ever gets addressed. Like, even when a candidate or a person will talk about Julian Assange in a big public setting, no one ever says, well, not no one, but in larger settings, people don't say, well, Nancy Pelosi was right on torture in 2003. No one says that. No one says that in 2004, the New York Times had information about the Bush era wiretapping programs, that it didn't get published again until 2007. Like, why do you have to wait until someone goes on to talk about that specifically in a little platform like this, or wait for years later when it comes up in a Joe Rogan podcast that happened recently, with Edward Snowden? Why?
Nice job there.
Yeah, sorry, my brain was trying to put
No,
some
that was
pieces
good.
together. But
Hey, at least he remembers to plug somebody's show.
right,
Right.
so I guess the point
I have that article, by the way, now.
okay, the point I'm trying to get to is we can't make heroes out of people that make a living out of being a hero. Like, that's what these politicians try to do, is they try to be the person that makes you think that they can save the world. So if you could pull that article up.
For sure. Going over to that now. And this is I've skipped down through quite a bit because this has the actual quote from Bernie Sanders. First, he says that he would not prosecute. He doesn't agree with the Espionage Act, prosecution under the Espionage Act. And then during the interview, The Intercept noted that Trump has referred to White House officials who provided information to the whistleblower who went through legally sanctioned channels and alerted Congress of Trump's Ukraine activities as spies. Democrats widely condemned Trump for the comparison, though those same Democrats have not generally objected to the Justice Department's use of the Espionage Act to prosecute whistleblowers who leaked to journalists, suggesting that the media is being treated tantamount to a foreign adversary. Bernard Jesus Sanders said, quote, whistleblowers have a very important role to play in the political process, and I am very supportive of the courage of that whistleblower, whoever he or she may be. Asked if he would give a second look at the record-setting length of the sentence doled out to National Security Agency contractor Reality Winner, Sanders demurred, saying that he was supportive of whistleblowers, but unfamiliar with her case. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who joined Sanders during the interview, agreed. I don't want to speak out of turn when it comes to Reality Winner, but I just think that the prosecution of whistleblowers is frankly against our democracy. We rely on whistleblowers, we rely on journalists in order for us to hold our systems accountable. Reality Winner was sentenced to 63 months for leaking top secret NSA document related to Russian interference in the 2016 election to a news organization that was widely reported to be The Intercept. She is still currently being silenced in prison. We are back to the chat screen, or our screen. What do you think about that? I know what Andrew thinks about that.
I think this is being used as, at least how I've seen it being used in the Twitter sphere, as hey, look, Bernie will save whistleblowers. Bernie's gonna save Julian. Yay, told you so. And that's not what he said at all. But that's what the burners want to believe, that this is it. See, he was gonna do it all along. Bernie's our man. Bernie won't let us down.
And here's it's hard to square that circle when the only time he referred to a whistleblower was in relation to Ukraine. And then Reality Winner is brought up, and I don't know. I don't know anything about it. I 100% believe that whistleblowers should, not be prosecuted for blowing whistles, but I don't know anything about them.
Right. What they're doing, the Bernie supporters are taking a very broad and vague statement and applying it to a very specific case. And I think that that was done intentionally on Bernie's behalf, of course, because, he made this very broad statement, and it can be interpreted in many different ways and applied to different cases. So I think that you can't say that, okay, he says he supports whistleblowers, so that must mean he supports Assange. At this point, that's not acceptable. You have to say the name. And plus, of course, we know that many politicians only support whistleblowers who reveal information that's advantageous to them politically.
And
So
as
what
we know,
would I was just gonna no, go ahead.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say, as we know, Assange is not a whistleblower. So Bernie saying he supports whistleblowers does not equal he supports Assange. Assange is
True.
a journalist and the publisher. So Bernie's I support whistleblowers might help Snowden, it might help Chelsea Manning, but that does not equate that he is going to do anything to save Assange.
Not an iota, not one little bit. And this is, again, is another forsaken opportunity by Bernie Sanders to and we've gone through all of the buts. We've gone through all of the excuses. We've gone through, however advantageous it may be to not piss off a media that is 100% wired to hate you. Like it just, there is, based on what we've seen just tonight, what we just showed you and what we've read that we've covered in the last however little bit, there is no reason to put all of your hope into something that would not be able to occur until at least the third week of January in 2021, when the next president is inaugurated, or when the same current president is reelected again, because the DNC can't stop rigging elections, because they would rather lose to a Republican than win with someone who wants to tinker marginally around the edges of capitalism while keeping capitalism.
And so the thing that I want to talk about too is, if you ask Kamala Harris what she would think about prosecuting the Ukrainian whistleblower under the Espionage Act, right? What would she say? Like, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but there's something that I think that she would say, and it would probably sound something similar to the statement that we were fed. If you ask Elizabeth Warren, hey, what do you think of Reality Winner? I don't want to speak out of turn. I'll have to check my plan for that and get back to you. Like, we're being fed the same lines of BS just from different people because they were able to convince certain portions of the population that this person represented their ideology. And all that does is allow them not to address the issue, because everyone within that particular ideology, regardless of what it is, justifies a reason for not covering it and not talking about it. And there's no pressure that gets put on from the left. And that's insane to me, where anyone who tries to marginally say, like, hey, I support something like this, doesn't have to answer to anyone. You'd think if you were the underdog, bottom of the barrel, going to get cheated out of everything candidate, you would want to answer to your base. You would want to get these people pulled into the process, because that is a way to influence an election and pull a party to the left if that's what you're trying to do. So they'll say anything. And the Democratic Party will say anything to continue to protect war criminals. Like, you can't look at Bernie Sanders and think this man's going to protect my basic fundamental rights when he won't even talk about the fact that they're being threatened. Like, he's in so many words trying to redefine what a right is, from something that you are protected from by the government to something that you are guaranteed by the government. And it's one thing to address healthcare in a manner that says, let's make this a constitutional right and not just a piece of legislation that can get ripped away. But we can't lose the things that we identify as constitutional rights, which are protections for us to do these things from tyranny and from government. We can't give that up to get healthcare, because at the end of the day, the tyranny is just going to kill you anyways. Like, if there's no check on this power, your healthcare doesn't matter, because we're just getting marched off to camps like the rest of them. Like, it's insane that no one actually pushes these people to address big, widespread issues like this. Like, even that interviewer didn't say, what about Julian Assange? Like you said about whistleblowers, what about publishers?
Yeah.
And when that reporter was called out on Twitter, he thought, he replied, well, that would have been a good idea, but I was trying to do something more broader. And it's like, you're talking about the Espionage Act. You have a perfect example of it being used against somebody in your own profession, and you didn't think to ask about that. Stupid or liar?
Well, hey, here's the thing. Like, either there's a gag order about it from Bernie's campaign, and it's understood that if journalists want access to Bernie, they can't bring up Assange, or Ryan Grimm is too afraid to bring up Julian Assange. There's no, we ran out of time. There's no, we didn't get to it. There wasn't an avenue for it, as you just said. I mean, if you're, wow.
And even as you're a journalist, like, your job is to be asking thoughtful questions. That's a great question to ask. Like, that's a very, very important question. There's every reason to be compelled to ask that question, not only because the outcome of the case personally impacts you because of your profession, but because it's extremely relevant and it's very specific. So I think that it was probably a mixture of what was already said, and then also maybe an unconscious attempt to kind of distance himself from Julian Assange, as we see many people in the media doing, trying to not align themselves with him. But again, I'm just speculating based off of statements that others in the mainstream media have said. We do have another article to address. So, moving out of the United States and out of American politics right now, we're going to be talking about the latest in Australia with their MPs. And basically, there's been some efforts recently to bring Julian Assange home, I believe. So I want to open it up to you guys to kind of briefly explain what that means.
Okay, let me go ahead and pull the article, and we're on the screen. 11 federal MPs have joined forces to agitate for the Morrison government to intervene in the United States attempt to extradite WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange from Britain to stand trial on espionage charges. Independent MP Andrew Wilkie said the cross-party group, which includes 2 national MPs, 2 Labor MPs, and members of the Greens and the crossbench, would provide a forum to discuss matters relating to Mr. Assange returning to Australia. Mr. Assange told a London judge on Monday that he was in an inequitable fight against a superpower, which had been spying on his interior life and on confidential meetings with his legal team. This would be a great place, by the way, for the Sydney Morning Herald to link to the El País article definitively confirming that that sentence is an accurate one. Queensland MP George Christensen will co-chair the group along with Mr. Wilkie, a longtime supporter of Julian Assange. Whatever people may think of him, Julian Assange is an Australian and deserves consular assistance and support from the Australian government. I agree with that. I'm going to bring it back to the panel here, and we can talk about that for a moment.
So
About
Australia's kind of been the wet sock this whole time. They've refused to do anything. Scott Morrison has refused to say or do or talk to his buddy Trump. So in the final hour, it seems that these MPs are finally, after almost 10 years, forming a working group. And could they be the Hail Mary that steps in and stops this? What do you guys think?
I hope so, but I think a lot of credit for this too is due to Bean, Summers Bean, because this has been their branding campaign since this
Right.
first started happening, which was bring Julian home. So I think that this shows the power of ground level activism like that, getting hundreds of posters, thousands of posters across downtown Sydney, having vans drive around with the Free Julian Assange signs on the back of them. Like, it was an extraordinary coordinated effort even to get this much of a reaction. So I think owing Summers Bean and all of the other organizers out there like Ian Rose that we had on here and people like that, they deserve a big win and a big thank you for this, because they are the ones that facilitated this happening as the ground level activists. But I think I want to see these people continue and to push and to fight, and then to take this a step further to essentially start trying to remove members of government that don't support bringing Julian home or that would oppose some step in that kind of process.
Sorry about that. That's the ad on the thing. I did not install an ad blocker on this. Sean should criticize me for that. That was nutty. Any
Well, I think that, Australia has remained silent for quite some time, and they've been subjected to much criticism for that, and rightfully so, because again, legally speaking, I'm not sure what they can do in this case, but at the same time, it's important to remember that the United States is of course applying its own laws beyond its jurisdiction. So I think it's very helpful for the country of origin, for the person that's being targeted here, which is Julian Assange, to really step up and say, no, you cannot do this to our own citizen.
The problem, though, is Australia has no what we would consider like constitutional First Amendment or constitutional protection for freedom of speech, for whistleblowers, for the press, for association. So that's the paradox that's created, is even if, not that it's a bad thing, but like the people would have to basically get a revolution to be able to have that law or that right that says what Julian did in the legal eyes of our country is okay. Because that's something that, like with the raids on the ABC studios and the other public broadcasting networks, like they have no rights. The Australian government can literally come in and edit records and edit news reports. So there's a larger struggle in Australia for journalistic rights and for the freedom of speech and expression. And trying to get Julian home really just, I think, would put that front and center for Australians to have to kind of look at if they get a chance to realize it.
No, I think you're exactly right. And I wonder if he was brought back to Australia, then would there be some sort of weird circumnavigating of the indictments then from the US to Australia? Would we be kind of going through this again, but in Australia, the US trying to pull them out? Yeah, because there are a lot of implications for Australia's free speech and free press going on right now too.
So yeah, we'll continue to look into this, but we definitely wanted to make sure that we addressed this because, of course, we've been critical, as many other supporters have, of the Australian government's silence on this case because
Well, it's not just silence. Their prime
inaction.
minister is vocally encouraging the UK and the US to carry out the.
Was it Scott Morrison who made like crude comments about Pamela Anderson, or was that another top Australian
No, I
government?
think it was. I think it was Morrison.
Yeah, so it's always just kind of been this weird, jokey. I don't know. It's they have not seemed to take it very seriously. I'll say that. I don't know if we want to talk. We've kind of mentioned the case in Spain, that there was a little bit of breaking news today. Actually, came out that the British justice system is blocking a Spanish judge's request to question Julian Assange as a witness in this case that is going through and exploring the spying that was happening in the Ecuadorian embassy. So really, we're really getting a lovely taste of what is happening in the UK and the lawlessness concerning any aspect of Julian's case, and this being a completely different case that outside of the extradition, but that his lawyers are trying to use evidence from, and now he's not even allowed to be a witness via a video link, is the article that came out today.
Do you think there's some legal mechanism that would force the UK to allow that to happen? Like, do you think there's some kind of underlying treaty through the EU that would force them to be allowed to question Julian Assange in that way?
Well, it is interesting that the UK was talking about shipping Julian to Sweden to be questioned earlier this year, but now is refusing a video link conference kind of witness questioning. So that's an interesting point. I don't know if this can be taken up and be appealed to the EU rights.
Exactly. Yeah. See, of course, he gets criticized for not, or he actually did answer to questioning from Swedish authorities, but they framed it differently. And he gets they framed it differently and, criticized him for not being willing enough to speak with them. Of course, because that was a case that would harm him. But now that this is something that could benefit him, they're doing everything that they can, it seems, to prevent any progress being made in that case, because it will directly benefit Julian and make the US and US intelligence agencies look pretty bad, in addition to other agencies.
And the
is it
other thing that it
implicating
could
the UK and the spying as well? I'm wondering if there was some, I don't know if this article explicitly says it, but if the UK is blocking it, are they complicit in allowing this spying to go on? And is this going to throw them under the bus for allowing this to happen in their own country, in their Ecuadorian embassy in London?
The other thing too is if Julian does get a video link or has to meet with anyone from the Spanish legal system in person, it may just prove and give more credence to Nell Miller's report and to all these other things that are coming out about the psychological torture and all of those other underlying things that are going on in there. Because if they get him on a Spanish video link and he doesn't have the ability to communicate the fact that this was happening.
I was just thinking that they're not going to look at what they did with his public appearance. They had 35 fucking decoy vans.
Yeah, they're trying to hide it quite a bit, as much as possible, of his condition.
The location of the trial, trying to shorten the length of the extradition hearing from 5 days to 2 days. It's just all of it is a concerted effort to silence this man, but hold him up at the same time as an example of what happens to any journalist who crosses the US government. And it is just, again, so fundamentally disturbing to me that more of our contemporaries aren't screaming about this every single day.
Yeah. Like I don't get the silence. Like
No,
I don't get how every person in the conversations that they have about war and about our foreign policy don't find a way to put him in there. Like when you have to type into Google to find an article about a topic, have another tab that you open that you type into WikiLeaks to find an article about the topic, because everything's in there. Whatever you want to find about any country, there's something in there. So when independent journalists link only mainstream media sources and don't link independent sources and don't link WikiLeaks, at this point, I almost see it as an intentional effort. Like, and it's just crazy that
As an intentional effort on whose part?
I don't I don't know if it's coordinated for some people or if it's just intentional for them to try to avoid a topic that might be too divisive, or intentional in the fact that maybe some of them work hand in hand with intelligence communities. Like, what's TYT talking about as far as Julian Assange goes? Like,
I have no earthly idea.
right,
I don't think they even are.
no.
exactly.
Not since the arrest. I haven't really seen much from them. If I'm wrong, I would please let us know in the chat if they've been talking about him, but
Well, and there's more to it than that. There's the TYT affiliates like Humanist Report, who if Julian Assange is mentioned, it's almost as an aside, rather than a central focus. And Andrew, you've said this multiple times, but like no matter what your cause or your issue is, or the thing that you want to succeed is, you need a free press for that. You need open flow of information. You need to know who is coming to stop you and how they plan on doing it. And that's why we need publishing outlets like WikiLeaks and journalists like Julian Assange to do this. We need Susie Dawson to do this. We need the people at Consortium News, Joe Lauria.
We need everybody watching this to do this.
Yeah.
if we don't have the freedom of information and we don't have the freedom and the ability to speak on that information, we don't have the ability to fight for anything. All the worries and the problems and the disasters in the world can be kept secret and away from us. And we're being fed, Syria bomb going off clip that's actually from Kentucky, and nobody will know any different. And so we are at a point in the time where we have the ability to check and recheck on the mainstream media news, and if it's correct and if it's accurate. And if we don't have that freedom, we won't know the truth. We won't know the truth about climate change. We won't know the truth about healthcare. And so yeah, it's really a trickle down effect. If you're not going to take those freedoms seriously and fight for them, what are you fighting for?
And with the current environment that we live in, a little bit of truth goes a long way. Like a little bit of action in a community makes a big difference. Like I found a community, Taylor and I found a community around here right next to me that using public space for speech is illegal. So it literally moved the authority of speech to property owning citizens within the community. No one talks about it, no one analyzes it, but at the same time, it's a sanctuary city. So just by me going out and putting up my little signs, I now have the ability to change the way that a city has to view its laws by going to city council meetings and addressing the fact that this is essentially regulating speech to property owning men, which is the majority of their population, the majority of which are white. And it's something that when you raise that issue, you can bring it up in so many different ways. Like this little sign about torture that I put up is now a greater conversation about how this city regulates its power, like political power, influence over the decisions in that community and what's has the ability to be spread. And so love or hate him, Edward Snowden did a good little bit on Joe Rogan today. And one of the parts that I thought was best was, I believe it was at 2 hours and 22 minutes was when he started talking about it. And it circulated on Twitter a little bit, where he said,
I'll pull it up. Hang on.
Because it's literally the same thing that we've been trying to express here on this vigil, that anything you do in the world makes a difference, because if you're not doing it, no one else is. And he puts it into a really good context. So if I could transition us to that, I think it would be cool.
Yeah, I'm getting there, buddy. I am. It'll be a sec. Here, let me mute me in case there's more super loud.
Silence.
Yeah, we should probably not leave everybody in silence right now. So
Right.
I'm sure that some of you guys were able to catch up on this or see this, but Joe Rogan interviewed Edward Snowden. I know there's some mixed opinions on Edward Snowden, but despite that, he did have some really great points about activism and about initiating real change. And oftentimes, okay, Steve has it, so we're going to show you guys that clip right now, or a portion of that clip.
You're still muted, Steve.
Sorry about that. Hang on. Share computer sound, optimize screen for video clip. Bam. We take this back like a second or two.
And that's very useful for the Russian government broadly, because they can then take that and replay that on their domestic media, and they can go, look how strong we are. You know, the Americans are afraid of us, the Chinese are afraid of us, everybody's afraid of us, the French are afraid of us. We are strong, right? There's no question that Russia's going to be interfering in elections. There's no question that America is going to be interfering in Russian elections, right? Nobody likes to talk about this. And again, I need to substantiate that now that I've said that. I've got an old note that I've...
Sorry.
They want the same things that you do, right? And every time people go, oh, Russia, 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 every time people go, Russia bad, every time they go, Russia's doing this, they go, Russia's doing that, Russian people who have nothing to do with the government feel implicated by that. Like, do you feel like you're in charge of Donald Trump? Like, do you want to have Donald Trump's legacy around your neck? And then people go, oh, well, you know, you could overthrow Donald Trump. You know, you could overthrow Putin. Can you really? Like, is that how it works? So, yeah, I mean, look, I have no affiliation. I have no love for the Russian government. It's not my choice to be here. And I've made it very clear I would be happy to return home.
Is there any concern that they would deny you visa? I mean, how are you staying there?
It's a good question. So I have a permanent residence. People think I'm under asylum, but I'm no longer under. It's like a green card now. It's got to be renewed every 3 years. So yeah, sure, it's possible they could kick me out. And this was what the story I was telling you about before in Russian media was. They were saying, the Russian government should take some action against me, or I shouldn't be welcome here, or I should go home, because why is he criticizing the Russian government, right, when they're the people?
Is that like the Russian version of Fox News? Is that what they have over there?
I don't know enough about Russian media to tell you. I think it's supposed to be more like a Reuters or Associated Press, but the hell if I know. But the thing is this: what's the alternative, right? Yes, the Russian government could screw me, but they could screw me even if I didn't say anything. And so, should I shut up and be quiet in the face of things that I think are injustices because it makes me safer? Well, a lot of pragmatic people would say, yeah. They say you've done enough. They say you've done your part. They say whatever. Be safe, live long, be happy. But I didn't come forward to be safe. If I wanted to be safe, I'd still be sitting in Hawaii, making a hell of a lot of money to spy on all of you, right? And nobody ever would have known about this. The system would have gotten worse. But the system, the world, the future gets worse every day that we don't do something about it. Every day that we stay silent about all the injustices we see, the world gets worse, things get worse. And yeah, it's risky. Yeah, it's uncomfortable. But that's why we do it. Because if we don't, no one else will. All those years I was sitting, hoping for someone else to come forward, and no one did, right? That's because I was waiting for a hero. But there are no heroes, right? There's only heroic decisions. You are never further than one decision away from making a difference. It doesn't matter whether it's a big difference, doesn't matter if it was a small difference, because you don't have to save the world by yourself. And in fact, you can't. All you have to do is lay down one brick, right? All you have to do is make things a little bit better in a small way so that other people can lay their brick on top of that or beside that. And together, step by step, day by day, year by year, we build the foundation of something better. But yeah, it's not going to be safe, but it doesn't matter because individually, it's not, me, whoever you are, that's the Iron Man. I don't care if you're the biggest doomsday prepper with cans full of beans. If the world ends, it's going to affect you.
All right,
we make things better.
Oh, that was my favorite part, the cans of beans analogy. But that's really all it takes. Like
we're playing a game of I wonder if we get a copyright strike today.
Right. Hey, we're commentating. We interrupted it once to say it wasn't playing sound. Like that's fair use, right?
That's a defense.
Well,
that's after you get the infringement claim against you.
But so I think the larger point is that he's right. That's the way to do it, is just stepping up. Like just doing this, like just this little podcast, this little stream that we do. Like there's shit that I am scared to even say that I am afraid about. Like because of the level that I know that they can just retaliate against any one of us for the fact that we're speaking up and acting out about this. So you just turn it off. Like, I don't care. Like, yeah. I'm either going to get killed by lung cancer, tyranny, or climate apartheid. Like, I can take my pick. And if I choose to get killed by tyranny, that means that I get to go down fighting for what I believe in. Like, and I don't even mean that in a violent sense or in a like grab your pitchforks and burn the world. I just mean that in the sense of trying to do something to make my world better, like the world that we share better.
I was thinking that in context of Julian and when Ed talked about laying down just one brick, but I was thinking about what Julian has done and how many bricks he has laid down for us. And Monday, when a lot of people were expressing how upset they were after the hearing, and I was one of those people, I said, we all have to feel sad. And now we have to turn that into anger. And then we have to turn that into action. And even if we fail, we still have to walk through the fire with Julian. We have to see this through. And we have to keep fighting. We have to keep laying down our bricks. And like Andrew said, if we're, you know, if the world's going to come crashing to an end, at least we fought for it. And at least we fought for our integrity, our morals, our ethics, our rights, our freedoms.
I couldn't agree more. There's I think there's a point that everybody could get to engage in serious activism. But I say on the show all the time that everybody's on a journey. I'm not going to criticize who I was 15 years ago. Please don't criticize who you were 15 years ago. But if I could encourage accelerated learning in this particular sphere, oh man, I would, because we need you guys, we need your friends, we need their friends. Like, this has to be a and the international response that it's becoming. I know that Alex Hill's Candles for Assange has a lot going on, and I know that it's possible I know it's possible to rally people from all over the planet to speak on behalf of Julian Assange, because we do it every week. I know that. You know,
We do it every week as people that have more than full-time lives.
Yeah.
Like, we don't even have lives that enable us to be hard-hitting independent journalists right now. Like, we're all like,
we're not making money off
Right.
YouTube right now.
Yeah,
like this is
exactly.
a couple
kills
even
me, man.
phone
That's
calls
what,
and a text message every once in a while, and it's
Yeah, and
oh,
also too, as far as laying down the bricks, or laying down a brick and then every other people building upon that. That's kind of what we did with the vigils. Unity for J ceased doing them, so we picked it up. Of course, we made some changes to it, so it wasn't exactly the same, and got permission to do so, and that's what we did. And again, it's important too that you work in numbers, and that it's that the more people that do this, the more effective you will be. As Ed was saying, of course, one person just themselves can't make a difference. I would say though that Julian Assange is perhaps the exception to that. He is an example of one person who really made a difference, just him. Of course, he had staff members and people that helped him, but WikiLeaks is his idea, and he is the main person behind it, of course, without a doubt. But that's usually not how it works, and we have to all work together. So once we overcome that mindset of, oh, one person, I'm just one person, I can't make a difference. If we all think that way, nothing is going to get accomplished.
and if you go into it already convinced that one person can't make a difference, stop doing your fucking show. Just stop. Just
like
quit.
like when I had originally started putting up posters, like back in when Julian first got taken from the embassy to Belmarsh, trafficked from the embassy to Belmarsh. My idea was like, I want to see how far one person can take this. Like, I want to see like what one person can do. And then as I started acting as that one person, I realized that it's not one person, it's a bunch of one peoples. It's a bunch of one persons stepping up to do something, that it's not one individual, that it's individuals working in a collective group to accomplish a goal. And it's like, it's so simple and it's just right there, but it's literally just waiting for each one of us to step up and take the wheel, because that's all it is. Like, fuck self-driving cars. Like, this is where a self-driving society takes us, is to the verge of global tyranny. And we literally just need to grab the wheel and turn away from the wall and get back on track to actually developing our culture and our humanity and our society and our concept of rights and what it means to be a free person in a free society. So it's like, it's so much more than just freeing Julian. There's all of this other like interconnected struggle that goes into it, and it's just taking control of your life to have the ability to do some action with what you can and what you have.
When I started working with Unity for J, and we had what we called WikiBees working sessions, if anybody in the chat remembers those. A lot of times I was the only American on the few times I got to be on there. And I felt really isolated. I felt like I couldn't make a difference until I joined Unity for J. And then slowly and progressively, I met more and more Americans. And I've watched these groups like the Denver, Colorado group spurred out of nowhere. And now they have regular events. New Hampshire has events. The Bay Area and California has events. There's so many things that are cropping up here. And it's amazing how in a year's time, I went from feeling like, man, like, I don't know if the US is really gonna like get on this bandwagon and start rallying behind him. And we are, and we're building, and it's amazing that one person finding another person. And now we have the four of us, you know, in America doing these vigils week after week after week, and talking to people all over the world, and, you know, one person at a time. It's what we have to do.
Exactly. We all kind of found each other by accident. I mean, just from speaking up ourselves and being strong in our own convictions, and just kind of gravitated towards each other. And you'll be surprised that when you speak out, how you'll be able to find people that think similarly to you. But of course, we have seen in the past few months, at least, a surge in activist organizations or like groups in different parts of the United States kind of rise up and hold their own events. And that really happened, I think, partially as a response to the violent arrest of Assange. And it goes back to this idea that when you continually persecute somebody in, oh no.
Okay, we're back. It literally cut that entire thing off.
You were talking, Taylor. I think it froze on you.
So what I was so what I was saying was that all of us found each other by accident, basically, because we all kind of were speaking out and gravitated towards each other. But what my better point was that, of course, throughout the United States, we've seen this surge in different activist groups and organizations kind of popping up throughout the United States, basically in response to the brutal and violent arrest of Julian Assange back in April, going back to this fundamental idea that when the powers continually persecute somebody and further that persecution, and it's made public for everybody to see, it really ignites and creates an even deeper will and desire for activists and for people who weren't even activists to really step up and even do more. And I think that's absolutely what we're seeing here. And of course, so we all joke around here that solidarity is a word that Andrew doesn't like, because he, and his reasons for that make sense. I'm not going to speak for him, but basically he thinks that we should do more than just stand up in solidarity. So I'm looking at a comment right now. Steve is saying that arrest is now becoming Andrew's new solidarity. But that being said, we are thinking of maybe even changing the language and adding to not only his arrest, but also Julian being trafficked. Maybe Andrew, you want to speak to that a little bit? I know that was your idea, and I think
About it all in the context of Julian, unless it's like forced into the conversation. So I do appreciate you bringing it up, Taylor. We as in the United States government purchased Julian Assange to move him from one part of London to just outside of it. The International Monetary Fund, who was headed by, I believe at the time, and probably still is, the former CEO of Pepsi, who I believe was appointed by the Trump administration to that position, wrote a loan on the initial, like around that same time, for $4 billion to the nation of Ecuador. And our world has a human trafficking problem. We literally just witnessed this man get purchased and then moved, and then a revolution spark inside that nation because of the austerity measures that have come down on the people because of it. So it's like the United States government from the Ecuadorian embassy to Belmarsh prison puts it in a much better context and makes, I don't know, makes people listen up more. Because when someone gets arrested, you see that on the news every day. Like, my best friend got arrested. But when someone gets trafficked, when a human being gets purchased for the intent of torture, that's something completely different than an arrest. And so I think using that word of Julian was purchased by the US government to be moved from the Ecuadorian embassy to Belmarsh prison just makes it more apparent to people that this isn't normal.
Well, and here's the thing, when it's such a horrific concept to so many people, for either intergenerational reasons or because they're, you know, human, um it's hard for a lot of people to wrap that around their head. Like, the United States purchased Julian Assange for a $4.2 billion IMF loan. Then somebody just said in the chat, isn't the loan canceled now? I don't know the answer to that question. But look,
Jose said it when we had Jose on last week. He said it was not canceled.
yeah, that's what I thought. I didn't want to say one way or the other because I don't have confirmation in front of me, but you're
That's
right.
the last we've heard on it.
Yeah. But the wrapping your head around that and then trying to communicate to someone just the sheer absurdity that the United States paid Ecuador $4.2 billion to get Julian Assange, an Australian citizen, to prison in London so that he can then be extradited. It just, I mean, it sounds fictional. It sounds like a Robert Ludlum book. It and that it's playing out in real life, behind as closed doors as possible, with a timid at best independent media to cover it, with a handful of people that are doing as good a job as possible. Um, we have to be louder, we have to talk more, we have to engage people we wouldn't otherwise engage, and we've got to stress that whatever your cause is, you need a free press.
I agree. We do need to be louder, and more people in independent media need to be covering this and covering it more consistently. Again, there are some that do a fine job, but there needs to be consistent coverage of this issue and a constant seeking out of information on this case, because it's not the type of Julian's situation is not the type of thing that you're going to be given. You're not going to easily find information on it. You have to actively seek that out. So I think that's another important point to make when we're talking about making sure that those in independent media are aware of what's happening and that they're actively covering it.
So if I could steal the topic to just move us along to the next piece, and kind of bridging off of that to defending the independent media. There's an organization called FairTube right now, which is a group of YouTubers, specifically the guy who runs the Slingshot channel. I want to say his name's Jorg, but I don't know how to pronounce it exactly. He grouped up with a German metal union to form FairTube, which is trying to become a YouTubers union. They recently were supposed to enter into collective negotiations with YouTube and with Google in general, and Google decided that they did not want to let Jorg or any member of the YouTube community, any creator whatsoever, come to the discussions to talk about the collective negotiation process for this. So they backed out of the negotiating deal. And do we have that video? Could we pull that up?
I'm doing that right now.
Cool, because they could explain it way better than I can. But this is something that we need to get all independent media and independent journalists talking about. Like this is
So I was going to say,
essentially a
so
way.
even just
You're
the
muted, Taylor.
discussion,
Essentially a way to.
even just
There we
having
go.
I'm
the
sorry.
Hold on. Go ahead.
I was
Go.
just going to say, just reiterating the point that what Andrew was saying was this is just about even having a discussion to have a YouTubers union, correct? Not actually having one.
Correct.
That's
Okay.
it.
So I'm gonna go back over to YouTube now, and here we go.
And to be in Berlin talking to Google and YouTube managers. Instead, we are in good old Frankfurt again at the headquarters of IG Metall. And now we are going to explain why.
We were talking to Google to finalize the details of the meeting. We had the last phone call last Thursday. I wanted to confirm the list of people who would be at the meeting. Google agreed that it would be me and my colleague Vanessa Barth. However, they said no Jörg Sprave. They said he is not representative of YouTubers. They said he has his own contacts with YouTube and he can deal with his problems that way. I said, what is more representative than a community with more than 24,000 members? I said in our meeting we are not going to talk about Jörg's problems on his channel. We wanted to talk about problems that a lot of YouTubers have. I suggested we could have any other YouTuber, but they said no to that too. We discussed this back and forth and they did not change their minds. So I said, okay, that's how it is. Democracy and participation are very important to us. We have to ask the community if we do this meeting anyway or if we cancel. So we started a poll.
YouTube refusing to invite the YouTubers Union to the meeting was really unexpected. But it shows that they are really afraid of us, which is unfounded because we were looking forward to a constructive discussion. But otherwise, why would they not allow any YouTuber to be present at the meeting? As Christiane said, we had to decide together if we want to go and meet with them anyway without someone from the YouTubers Union, or do we cancel the whole thing? So on Thursday afternoon, I started a poll on the YouTubers Union Facebook group. Everyone in the group could vote and even add their own options. The result, by 10 a.m. Friday morning, over 2,400 people had voted. About 70% said we should cancel the meeting. So the answer was very clear.
On Friday, we told Google we are not coming to the meeting. I'm still disappointed in Google. Without the YouTubers Union and the deadline we set together, the meeting wouldn't even have been scheduled. I'm surprised that Google does not want to hear the difficulties of the YouTubers expressed by a YouTuber. Google says they want to make life better for everyone by making the world's information accessible. But apparently, this doesn't include YouTube creators, even though they are the reason for YouTube's success. Instead of letting YouTubers participate as equal partners in the development of the platform, Google has closed the door in their faces. This is not a real partnership. And this is not the action of a progressive 21st century organization. This is the action of a digital dinosaur with 21st century technology and a 19th century management style.
For us, this means it's time to start the action. In a few days, we will launch our first community campaign. That means get ready because we will need your help. We need to show YouTube that they cannot treat us like this.
We also have legal strategies. First, we believe that at least some YouTubers are not really self-employed but really employees. We will find out in court. Second, in the European Union, we have the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. This provides the right to see personal data that someone has stored about you. It also provides the right to correct personal data if it's wrong. The labels YouTube uses to classify videos and creators are personal data. And if there is no other way, we will demand these classifications in court. And if you are a YouTuber in the European Union and you want to ask YouTube for your personal data, we will help you do it.
We'll be announcing our next steps in great detail and asking for your help very soon. Thanks then. Bye-bye for now.
Oh, come on.
Hello and welcome to FairTube. Today we had planned to be in Berlin talking to Google and YouTube managers.
There
Instead,
we go. All right. There you are, Andrew.
I'm sorry.
Cool. So I just want to make sure that people know that that thing exists, because it's like, I just think it's awesome, because every creator in the world has been talking about something like this, and it's a brick, right? Someone put that down, trying to start this, trying to actually get it going, working with what I think is the oldest union in the world. I think they were like the first actual organizational piece of collective labor in the entire planet. So if there's anyone that can get shit done legally, it's them. So I want to make sure that everyone knows about that, because it makes me excited. It's a happy thing.
That was and you know that they had rehearsed that before, right? But like,
Oh yeah,
that was an incredibly German production. It was
beautiful. It was definitely people powered.
Teutonic stiltedness at its finest.
So do we want to move on to some activist dates and then close out? But before we do that, if there's any news that you guys want to bring up or anything's going on, or anything that is going on that you want to address. Okay, I guess not. So Christy, if you want to provide everybody with the dates and where they could access that information.
Yeah, so I'm coming up this Saturday, October 26th. There is a rally in London in front of the BBC, Correct the Record rally. It's from 2 to 4 p.m. And if you are in London and you'd like more information, you can go to the Twitter handle JA_defense, and that's DEFENCE. So this is the group out of London, and then usually does an event every few weeks now. So this one in particular is going to be in front of the BBC. I encourage you to go, and I encourage you. Emmy Whitland has made a huge effort at correcting the record, not only with the BBC, but anybody who writes a story about Julian Assange that does not have their facts straight. So I think this will be an amazing rally this weekend. And then, of course, coming up in November, November 5th is the Million Mass March. And you can go to millionmassmarchlocations.com to see if there is one in your area. The Anonymous is encouraging everyone to join forces and carry Free Assange signs. Also, November 5th, in front of the Home Office in the UK, rappers MIA and Low-Key will be appearing and speaking on behalf of Julian, and his father, John Shipton, has also been announced to be there. About a month and a half ago, Roger Waters did the same thing. So I'm hoping this becomes a regular thing where we have a celebrity or a musician in front of the Home Office in the UK speaking out. Hopefully we'll draw bigger crowds now that this one has been promoted a little bit longer. And yeah, of course, go to candlesforassange.com, go to Unity4J on Twitter to see all the upcoming dates. There are dates planned all the way through December now. So yeah, and if your action doesn't fall on one of those, it's okay. We still want to help promote you. We still want to put you on the map. We still want to promote your tweet. Let Candles for Assange or Unity4J know how we can help you with that.
All right, so I will begin by closing out, and I don't have any updates, but yeah, tonight was a big vigil. It lasted for a while because we had some really serious things to discuss with you guys, mainly being the fact that there's urgency in this case, great urgency, and that's something that's very important to remember, especially when you're hearing from politicians that they're going to wait to address Julian Assange's case. That's no longer okay. But you can follow me, or actually, I'm sorry, make sure that if you are interested in this type of material and freeing Julian Assange, you should also check out the 1 versus 5i campaign. You can follow it on Twitter at the number 1 vs the number 5 the letter I, and you could also get more information on the campaign at 1versus5i.com. And that is Susie Dawson's campaign, and she is taking on the 5 Eyes. And she also holds teach-ins every Sunday evening. I believe there is going to be a really big episode this Sunday evening. That is at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on her channel, Susie 3D. Make sure you check that out. It really is information that you will not find anywhere else. Nobody else is talking about this, and especially in to the extent that she is and to the level of depth that she is. So do check that out, because she also touches on Julian Assange as well in his case, and how he did promote her work and was a fan of her work and her exposing of the intelligence agencies. And my name is Taylor Hudak. If this is your first time watching the vigils tonight, you could follow me on Twitter at _Taylor Hudak, and then also you can find some of my work on action4assange.com. I haven't written much lately. I've just been updating my article. That's because I'm really focused on completing this master's degree. I'm ready to get it done. So once that's done, I'll really be able to focus on, and that's in December, beginning of December. Once that's done, I'll really be able to focus more so on writing about issues related to whistleblowers and Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. And again, also follow ActionForAssange on Twitter at action_4Assange. Thank you guys so much for watching.
Yeah, so you can find me at Andrew Zigman on Twitter. That's pretty much the only place that I'm mildly active on. If you're interested in getting involved in activism, you really aren't sure where to get started, or you feel like you'd like someone to help you out with the cost of like posters or something like that, feel free to email me, ActionForAssange at protonmail.com. Yeah.
Okay.
Steve?
I'll go. If you're seeing me for the first time, my name is Steve Poikinen. I host a show called Slow News Day here on the YouTubes. I try as hard as humanly possible to take all of my baseline content from independent sources. I interview independent journalists and people who operate outside of the corporate media bubble there. I do not do a political horse race show. And you should check it out if you have not. I am more often than not live every Sunday morning here in California for me at 10 a.m., 1 p.m. Eastern time for a couple of hours. Yeah. You should get on that. And thank you everyone for being a part of this. This is it was a heavy episode, and thanks to everyone who stuck through it with us. We love you guys.
I just want to encourage everybody to grab that Rupley footage. It's on Twitter of Julian, and spread it around. Post it under your favorite candidate's tweets. Let's make sure the world doesn't forget about Julian. I think it's really important to specifically share that footage because it shows what conditions he's in and the torture and what it's doing to him. But you can amplify Assange with his words and with his interviews and talks he's given. So there are so many ways, there's so many memes and graphics out there that you can use. But specifically, I think it's really important to get that Rupley footage out there. You can use it when you talk to your independent media person that you want to cover. Say, look at this footage of him. Why aren't you covering this? So I really want everybody's help and making sure people don't forget about Julian, because like I said, we're not really sure if we're going to see him again. Definitely not in the next few months, that is for sure, and probably not till after the extradition hearing. So like I said, you can follow me at Unity4J. I help run the Twitter account over there, but you can also follow me at Christy Doff is my new updated Twitter handle. So yeah, I just want to thank everybody. This is our 16th week of doing this. We're 4 months old now. We're growing up so fast. And thank you for joining us. Thank you for staying late with us or early, depending on where you are in the world. We really love you guys and we appreciate your support. And we'll see you next week.